Good morning to you. It's 9:30 on Wednesday, the 4th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GBNews with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner, live in Manchester on the final day, you might say thank God for that, of the Conservative Party conference.
Britain faces a hurricane of mass migration. That's the warning from Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who says that her Illegal Migration Act will help to protect our borders.
Those arriving illegally will be detained and removed back to their home country if possible, or to a safe third country like Rwanda.
HS2, the Prime Minister is going to effectively say in his speech today it's not going to happen, that link from London to Manchester. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, says cancelling it will tell the people in the north of England they're second-class citizens when it comes to transport.
Beggars belief in some ways that they are about to do this. To pull that plug here in Manchester would show complete contempt for the people of this city region and of the north of England as a whole.
More strikes. Today is the first ever joint strike action by rail workers and the NHS. Train drivers, junior doctors and hospital consultants are all taking industrial action this morning.
And changing the status quo, Rishi Sunak will pledge in his speech to tackle the broken political system. He's talking around midday. We'll have all the latest before he takes to the stage. I bet you can't wait.
We're also going to have a whole troop of great guests here this morning in Manchester, so don't go anywhere. First, though, here is the news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 9:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. After weeks of speculation, the Prime Minister is expected to scrap the northern leg of HS2 in his party conference speech today. Rishi Sunak will address the Conservative Party as leader for the first time this lunchtime. GB News has learned that the high-speed rail line initially planned to run to Manchester will now stop at Birmingham. Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, says the decision will leave people living in the north feeling like second-class citizens. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says the money could be spent in better ways.
If he were to scrap, and it's the second leg of HS2 we're talking about, and take that money, you can't really judge it without finding out where that money is going to be spent, because that could actually have a fantastic levelling up opportunity. It's billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds. So what could that be spent on? And perhaps there are things which are worthwhile doing more than building a high-speed rail line, given COVID, given what's happened since, given the change in travel patterns.
Well, those attending the conference may well struggle to get home again. Large parts of the train network are at a standstill today as thousands of rail workers walk out. The disruption means much of the country will be without services, and those that are running will start later and finish earlier. Members of the drivers' union ASLEF are striking as their long-running dispute over pay continues. The rail delivery group and the government says there's a fair and reasonable deal on the table. ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan says union bosses want the strikes to continue. And researchers say a new robot could revolutionise checks for breast cancer. A team at the University of Bristol has developed a device with sensors that could detect lumps at greater depths. It's hoped that the device could be rolled out to easily accessible locations so more women can get tested. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back over to Andrew and Bev live in Manchester.
Yeah, I think you're probably right.
Good morning. We are in Manchester at the Tory Party conference where your Prime Minister will be talking at about midday today. So the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, warned everybody here yesterday that there is a hurricane of mass migration underway. Let's have a listen.
The wind of change that carried my own parents across the globe in the 20th century was a mere gust compared to the hurricane that is coming. Let me tell you, our country has become enmeshed in a dense net of international rules that were designed for another era. And it is Labour that turbocharged their impact by passing the misnamed Human Rights Act. I'm surprised they didn't call it the Criminal Rights Act.
It was a very divisive speech, that. There are those on the left who are outraged by the language that she used, and there are a lot of people here who thought it was
I think
brilliant.
she spoke for the great silent majority in this country who are appalled by what's going on with our migration. The Tories are responsible for a lot of it. Legal migration last year was over 600,000. The Tory manifesto said it should be 250,000. There was a time when David Cameron and Theresa May were Prime Minister, it was going to be in the low tens of thousands. So good luck to Suella Braverman. She knows what she's doing with that language. It is emotive, it is powerful, but she's saying what people think. This country is full up. We've got no room in our schools, no houses, no room in the NHS for thousands of people crossing the Channel illegally.
I think the problem is, though, they made it sound like the Conservatives have been passengers in this.
I know, I agree.
In this trend, and they've been in the driving seat that has allowed that to happen. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more, I think, meat on the bones of how she would change it. She didn't talk about the ECHR at all.
No. Noticeable
by its absence, to mention that. She did talk about students not being allowed to bring their families over. I think what's alienated a lot of people, upset people who are pro much more immigration and pro more refugees even, is the fact that she named certain groups. So she mentioned the Albanians, she mentioned, as I say, the students and different countries. And I think that's what's annoyed people, because it sounds divisive. It sounds like pointing a finger at the people, not the system.
Well, the system is completely screwed up, and she's only been Home Secretary for a year, but actually it's the right language.
Well, it certainly has been greeted with some areas of the media, as you say, as courageous are the words they're using about her. They're saying that she was brave, that she's now finally talking to those people who want to see a true Conservative Party and feel that too much mass immigration too quickly has affected their communities. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is going to be making his keynote speech at midday today. He's promised to change the status quo and tackle the broken political system. He's called
The Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer. It's so boring, isn't it, when they just attack the opposition? But anyway, he said he's a continuity choice for voters. That's snappy, isn't it?
Continuity.
That's really going to get them going in the dog and duck tonight, isn't it? Continuity choice for voters. Well done, Rishi.
So what needs to change? GBNews presenter and leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, joins us now. Good morning, Richard.
Very good morning to you. Well, whilst you're away, I'm staging a coup in the studio, Bev and Andrew. Good morning. Look, a huge amount needs to change.
Always nice to see you.
A huge amount needs to change. And what's extraordinary about the pre-briefing for the Prime Minister's speech is that actually we're not hearing about anything as to what he is going to change. He seems to forget that his party has been in charge for 13 years. All the problems of the country, whether it's the amount of tax we pay, whether it's the fact that none of the public services work, you've just been touching on mass migration. They're responsible for all of this, and yet he's trying to blame the Labour Party. And the only thing he's going to announce is scrapping the one long-term policy they've been hanging their hat on for the last 13 or 15 years, which I've always been against, by the way. But if he genuinely is going to scrap it from Birmingham to Manchester, he's actually scrapping the best bit of a whole bad policy. Quite extraordinary. And no positivity, no action. And it was interesting in Suella's speech yesterday, Bev and Andrew, that she gave no positive actions that she was going to do. All she did was use strong, warm language that the Tory faithful want to hear. But where was the policy? Where was the action? And that's why Nigel last night quite rightly criticised it. All warm words, no delivery, no action, and the British people will be left disappointed.
Nigel Farage's popularity here, Richard, we just want to mention this a little bit to touch upon it. Rishi Sunak is saying that he'd be welcome back in the Conservative Party. That's the only way he can say, that's the only response he can say to Nigel Farage being here, given the reception that he's had here in Manchester. It's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Do you think he would join the Conservative Party? I think that he would if they were going to make him leader.
Look, I think everybody's having quite a lot of fun, making a lot of mischief. I think Nigel's making a bit of mischief. I think actually the Prime Minister was probably doing that in return. Look, the reality is that Nigel is challenging them like you. Where's the delivery? Where's the action? Where's the future? How are you going to put right what you're responsible for causing that everything has gone so badly wrong? And I think that's the key message that's going to come away from this conference, the last conference before the election. Everybody assumes that actually we're almost now into the sort of the 12-month countdown to the general election. And I think what we've got to do is we've got to say, these are the things that have gone badly wrong after 13 years of Conservative leadership, and this is what needs to be done in order to fix it, to get the country back on track again.
Richard, if you were to do an assessment of what the Conservatives have achieved in those 13 years of government, could you list 5 major achievements?
No, absolutely not. It would be impossible. It would take a long time to think about that, Andrew. I could think about one that they have done, which is we have technically, legally left the European Union. That is an achievement that we all played a significant role in. But they haven't then used that great opportunity. That opportunity is still there. We can still make a huge success of it. But you've got to believe in it. You've got to actually do it. You know, if you're going to do a job, Andrew, do it properly, or frankly, don't bother starting. And that's our big criticism of them at Reform UK. You've got to cut taxes. You've got to cut wasteful, daft government spending and useless EU regulations. You've got to get the country moving again. That's what people want. And look after British people. That's what Suella was talking about yesterday. But no, everyone knows nothing will happen, even in the hall itself. People were complaining about the language that she was using. She was doing what actually voters want. They want politicians who just tell it as it is, give us the unvarnished truth. We don't want waffle. We want action and delivery.
OK. And what should we expect, do you think, today from Rishi Sunak? What can he hope for in this speech? It's incredibly important that he gets the tone of this right, Richard. He's done a good job this week, actually, in terms of meeting people here. I think everybody that's met him, when he's done the handshaking around the stands, he's making a very, very good impression on people. A lot of people are impressed by his warmth, and actually, in real life, he is much less robotic than he sometimes appears on the telly. And somehow he has to get that across, his humanity in the speech, doesn't he?
He does, but his speech could be completely kiboshed if the rumours are true that Andy Street is on the verge of resigning, his Conservative mayor of Birmingham, over the HS2 policy. If that's true, that will be the big story of the day. In terms of what he's actually going to offer in the speech, well, the fact that nothing has been put out there except the sort of the rumours and the complete mishandling of the whole messaging around HS2, actually, I think, yes, he can glad hand and impress people walking around. But people want action, Bev. They want to know where the country's going. They want solutions. And we've heard none of that at all. If he wants to really impress, that's what he's got to do. I just don't think we've heard anything like that at the moment. And that's why, frankly, people are so disappointed.
OK. Thank you, Richard.
We've got in the studio here in Birmingham, in Manchester with us, of course, is Liam Halligan, our business. Liam, how many documentaries and programmes have you done on HS2?
Oh, too many.
You're an HS2 boy.
I'm an HS2 nerd. Michael Portillo's got nothing on me.
You have the HS2 anorak in your honour.
I do.
They're right to get shot of this, aren't they?
I'm afraid, as an economist, I've been really sceptical of HS2 since the outset, as is indeed the man who brought the HS2 company into law, then Transport Secretary Alistair Darling, who in 2009 created the HS2 company. He said to me last week, yeah, but I didn't think they'd be bleep stupid enough to do it.
Amazing, isn't it? Isn't amazing?
A little
That's going in my column.
Little scoop for you there. Look,
amazing.
The cost-benefit analysis of high-speed rail in a small country where distances are short in the UK has never stacked up.
Yeah.
All the international evidence of high-speed rail in Spain and in France shows that what it does, it draws more and more business to the big cities and less to the outlying regional centres. I've always thought it's been a vanity project. It's massively over-engineered. How's it got this far? Because there's a very, very powerful engineering lobby that's been behind it, and there have been very, very powerful landowners who've bought up land along the line by the proposed stations, and they're making massive speculative gains, plus ministerial inertia. I think the Tories have left it far too late. But on balance, given that the cost-benefit analysis never really works, what does that mean? It means we're not getting nearly enough bang for our taxpayer buck in terms of economic benefit. I actually think Rishi Sunak is doing the right thing.
And actually, it's not just inertia. They were panicking of some of the Tories about if we cancel it, what will this say about levelling up? What will this say about our commitment to the north of England?
But people who really understand levelling up, and even Andy Burnham, who I know well and has appeared in several of my HS2 documentaries, Andy would, I mean, he'll speak for himself. Obviously, he doesn't want HS2 Birmingham to Manchester to be cancelled, but he will tell you that the far better return is by linking up the great northern cities, widening that Trans-Pennine route, Liverpool all the way across to Hull, Manchester, Middlesbrough and Newcastle, and that may be indeed, certainly when Grant Shapps appeared on the radio this morning, he dropped a very, very strong hint that there will be the prioritisation of HS3. It doesn't need to be high speed. As long, you know, back in the 70s, trains were going at 125 miles an hour. It's fast enough. With the distances are small.
Yeah.
If you want a high-speed rail, it's got to be.
In Russia.
You need straight lines, and we're not even in France. You need straight lines. You got to tunnel through mountains. It's just not worth. It's just vanity. And I think there'll be other smaller projects as well. Other bus and
we're going to be talking to Penny Gaines later in the show. She was the head of the HS2 Stop campaign, so I'd be fascinated to hear what she thinks about this. Scarlett Maguire is also with us, the director of JL Partners and political analyst, pollster. Scarlett, what do you think we can draw from this speech today that Rishi Sunak is going to make at midday? What would you expect to see as a pollster after this? What would be a good lead in terms of a bounce? What would be a good result?
I think a good result would be, and I think we heard Grant Shapps sort of rolling the pitch for this a bit this morning, but a major announcement of different infrastructure, potentially better infrastructure, or infrastructure that people in these communities that HS2 was meant to benefit would actually like more. I think if he can show that that's what he's going to do, and I feel like that's the hints that that's what's coming, I think actually that has the potential to be a very good moment for Rishi Sunak, and you know, could potentially actually overshadow some of the dithering and some of the other problems this conference has seen. But I think it will require something big like that to cut through and to tell a positive story out of it.
We've seen a poll, I think today, the Labour lead back at 19 points. We'd had a poll at the weekend, 10 points, and a poll before, 15 points. Were those polls just one-offs, do you think, showing the contraction?
I don't necessarily know whether they were one-offs. I do think it's too early to tell whether they were just noise. I do think what it does look like is that potentially that summer where we had weeks and weeks of a static Labour lead of 20 points, maybe that was the bottoming out point. Maybe things won't get worse from here and it will slowly start to get better. I guess, though, I think it was probably unrealistic to think just off the back of the net zero stuff alone and the motorist announcements that they'd suddenly be 10 points ahead again consistently.
Yeah, right. And your overall impression of the conference so far? I mean, if you listen to the BBC, it's doom and gloom for the Tories here. Actually, I don't feel that here, having been to conferences since 1988-89. I've been to conferences where the atmosphere is much more gloomy.
Yeah, I think, gloomy is not the word I would use to describe it. I have noticed I haven't seen many MPs around, and that does seem to be,
can't afford the hotel bills. It's expensive here.
And the train strike.
Go back to Caesar, where you can get a blooming B&B for £45 a night or something, or a week, and a train strike as well. Today.
So I think there's that, and I would say that, I was expecting it to feel a lot more funereal than it has done. Although I do think it is still a little bit flat, and actually I was talking to a couple of young activists in the bar last night, and I was saying, what was your, what was conference like for you? And they said, well, thank goodness for Suella's speech. They said that was the only thing they felt was actually something that was optimistic or got people enthused. He said it felt like the only natural standing ovation, one of the only packed out rooms, apart from Liz Truss, of course. So I think, a fine conference. I think everyone's expectations were so low that means that even a fine conference, can feel
Interesting you mentioned young people. I've noticed a lot of young people here. A lot of young people around the GBNews stand. Far more than previously I've seen at Tory conferences. I think there's a real movement in this country now of young people who realise, that they read stuff and they realise that our generation and our parents' generation, with respect, has pushing debts onto them. They can't buy houses. They haven't got workplace pensions, and I think there's something really interesting going on there.
And they engage with politics in a different way.
They do.
They're not reading it in my newspaper, the Daily Mail, your old paper, the FT. They're doing it on Facebook and on all these websites.
The other thing I'd say is, I think that Liz Truss rally, I think that really was a bit of a watershed because, of course, we're talking about HS2 today, and I think Downing Street wants us to do that, and I think Scarlett's right. If there is another big announcement, say on what we call HS3, a Trans-Pennine route, of course people will say, but why should we believe you? You said you'd deliver Manchester to Birmingham. You said you'd deliver Birmingham to Leeds as well, and they're now not happening. But I think the HS2 row that we're having now, the timing, though we were originally talking about HS2 because it was originally leaked to pressure the government, but I think the government's turning it to its advantage because today we're not going to be talking about tax. We're not going to be talking about Liz Truss anymore, even though that rally was astonishing. I mean, the headline in the Telegraph was "Hundreds queue for Truss," which is completely unexpected.
Except that, of course, she was voted for by the membership.
That's right.
We kind of forget that. She's popular.
And I chaired that meeting, as you know, and when I made that point in the introductory remarks, the room went ballistic. I mean, everyone just went, yeah!
Well, Tory members are very cross because
they are very cross.
The few things they get is to choose their MP, their candidate,
that's right,
to choose the leader, and their last two leaders they chose were deposed.
Indeed, by MPs / even they would say by civil servants in some senses.
If I could be a fly on the wall anywhere today, I would really want to be in Keir Starmer's office watching this Sunak speech this afternoon, because they haven't actually issued a statement yet, have they, about HS2? I know Andy Burnham has come out as Labour mayor and obviously expressed his disgust and disappointment at this decision, but how should they handle this? What do you think, Scarlett? Well, how does Labour handle this? Because it is quite popular. There's been a huge voice saying we don't want a HS2, it's a waste of money.
And I do think, even though the HS2 was originally a Labour idea, of course, they are not, it's quite hard to hold them responsible for the 13 years that it's been delivered very badly and all the waste that's been going on in the meantime. So actually, I do think Keir has a little bit of a, not so much a free pass, but an easier pass than this on Rishi Sunak to support not doing it and doing something else instead. Whether he would want to be seen to be in agreement with Rishi on that, I don't know, but I think it is easier for him to then say it's the right thing to do.
But what he doesn't want to do is get on the wrong side of Andy Burnham too, because Andy Burnham's a very popular figure, particularly up here in the north, in Manchester, king of the north as he's known, and Andy Burnham won't hesitate to stick the boot in on Keir Starmer.
No, absolutely not. And I say that he has an easier pass, but Keir Starmer is a man who often makes easy things look quite difficult. So
what a very good way.
Generously put. Andy Burnham is a very strategically acute guy, and that's why he's been laying in the papers the last couple of days this idea that he's trying to broker a deal with the Prime Minister.
He'll claim the credit for this.
He will claim the credit if they do say we're going to do HS3 across the Pennines while scrapping Birmingham to Manchester. But still, don't worry, Andy saved the day because,
might be right.
because these HS2 trains, they're going to carry on the same tracks, obviously on the conventional tracks that are twisty rather than straight. Then the trains will have to go at conventional speeds, but you can still sit on the same train. It will still be faster because London to Birmingham will be faster, etc., etc., etc. But I agree with you, and going back to those documentaries in my train spotting days, whenever we did polls on HS2, yes, big business likes it, small business don't. They want commuter trains into and out of towns. They want buses, so they've got a broader range of people that they can choose for the jobs.
Small bits don't give a hoot about getting to Manchester 20 minutes
And
quicker.
in general, there was a sense that this is not very popular. This is a vanity project. This is about turning Sutton Coldfield and Blackburn into suburbs of London. Bringing in the commuter belt right into the centre of town. I think this is astute by Sunak. He will take it on the chin, the criticism.
All my Mancunian mates, while I've been up here, I've asked them, are you happy about this? And they all say, we never wanted it anyway.
No,
absolutely right.
Do you know what they say? They say, make the Wi-Fi better on the train from Manchester to London. It's already 2 hours door to door.
And electrify trains
allow
in the
me
north.
to work. And do you know what? Provide me with a decent cup of coffee on the train. Our needs are much lower than...
And and David Davis, Yorkshire MP, he said this is a southern solution to a northern problem. Southern
right, we've got to go, guys. We're going to cut us off. We're going to be looking ahead to this speech. Don't go anywhere.
Hello, good morning. We have a north-south split in our weather today. Here's your latest GB News weather bulletin. I'm Alex Burkill. We are going to see some wet weather already across western parts of Scotland, feeding further eastwards across many parts as we go through the day, but the heaviest rain will always be across western areas, where we're likely to see totals building up, some localised flooding and disruption to travel here. Elsewhere across many parts of the UK, there will be some showers around, perhaps not as many as we saw yesterday, and they probably won't be quite as intense, and there's a lower chance of seeing some thunder too. The winds will be slightly less strong, and with temperatures reaching highs around 19, possibly 20 Celsius, it should feel relatively warm in any sunny breaks. Through the end of the day, we are going to see any showers dying out, but there will still be some outbreaks of rain around. You can see some rain across parts of northern England into Northern Ireland, and some rain pushing into parts of Wales and the southwest, and then another swathe of wet weather feeding across Scotland as we go through the early hours of Thursday. But because of the cloud and rain, it is likely to be a milder night than it has been recently, for many places at least. As we go through Thursday then, quite a cloudy, damp picture across particularly western, northwestern parts, brighter towards the east, but even here I am expecting the cloud to fill in a little bit as we go into the afternoon. More wet weather then pushing its way in from the west and the northwest, and so it is going to turn increasingly wet, particularly across western parts of Scotland as we go through Thursday and into Friday. Temperatures for many similar to today.
Love, we're about to be back on set.
Good morning, thank you for joining us here in Manchester at the Conservative Party conference. Still to come, we're going to be looking ahead to the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's keynote speech. It's going to start in a couple of hours. Don't go anywhere.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock on Wednesday, the 4th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearson, Bev Turner, live in Manchester for the final day of the Conservative Party conference. So Britain faces a hurricane of mass migration. That's the warning from Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who says that her Illegal Migration Act will help to protect our borders.
Those arriving illegally will be detained and removed back to their home country if possible, or to a safe third country like Rwanda.
And HS2 finally, will he or won't he? It's going to be announced today that the Manchester link is going. But and Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, says cancelling it will tell the people in the north of England they are second-class citizens.
Beggars belief in some ways that they are about to do this. To pull that plug here in Manchester would show complete contempt for the people of this city region and of the north of England as a whole.
More strikes. Today is the first ever joint strike action by rail workers and the NHS. Train drivers, junior doctors and hospital consultants are all taking industrial action this morning.
And changing the status quo, Rishi Sunak will pledge to tackle the broken political system in his keynote speech here at around midday. We'll have all the latest before he goes on the stage. Cheers.
We're going to have our political editor Chris Hope in the studio with us in just a moment to say what does that mean when Rishi Sunak says he's going to break the status quo. First, though, here is your very latest news with Rhiannon.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's coming up to 2 minutes past 10. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister is expected to announce the northern leg of HS2 will be scrapped. Rishi Sunak set to defend the move when he addresses the Conservative Party conference at lunchtime, saying the funds will be reinvested into other schemes in the North and Midlands. The high-speed rail line, which was initially planned to run to Manchester, is widely expected to stop at Birmingham. Defence Minister Grant Shapps says the government's still committed to levelling up.
If he were to scrap, and it's the second leg of HS2 we're talking about, and take that money, you can't really judge it without finding out where that money is going to be spent, because that could actually have a fantastic levelling up opportunity. It's billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds. So what could that be spent on? And perhaps there are things which are worthwhile doing more than building a high-speed rail line, given COVID, given what's happened since, given the change in travel patterns.
Meanwhile, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, says the move would break multiple Tory manifesto pledges.
It isn't too late from our point of view. You could invite us in. We are prepared to discuss ways in which this could be done to provide that east-west infrastructure first. But do not pull the plug on this city while you are in this city. Do not pull the plug on the north of England. Do not treat people here as second-class citizens when it comes to transport, because if you do those things, people here will never forget.
Well, those attending the conference may well struggle to get home again, as large parts of the train network are at a standstill today. Thousands of rail workers are on strike. The disruption means much of the country will be without services, and those that are running will start later and finish earlier. Members of the drivers' union ASLEF have walked out in a long-running dispute over pay. The Rail Delivery Group and the government say there's a fair and reasonable deal on the table, but ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan says the offer was designed to fail.
As you've seen this week, these people don't care. They don't want a resolution. They deliberately set up the last deal to fail by putting all our red lines within it, knowing we couldn't accept it, and they do not want to talk to us at all. They want this to go on.
Well, that as consultants, as well as junior doctors, are on their third and final day of unprecedented strike action. Many hospitals are operating on Christmas Day-style cover. It's the longest strike in the dispute for consultants, whilst junior doctors are threatening further walkouts later this year. The BMA is demanding a return of negotiations, but the government says this year's 6% pay rise is final. Elsewhere, officials in Italy say foreign nationals are among the 21 people who died after a bus crashed off a flyover near Venice last night. Ukrainian, German, French and Croatian tourists are understood to have been on board. They were on their way to a campsite in the district of Mestre. 18 people have also been injured after the coach fell 15 metres onto electricity lines before bursting into flames. The cause of the accident is still unclear. Venice's mayor has described the scene as apocalyptic. Well, today's the deadline for the Home Office to respond to a legal challenge on the use of the Bibby Stock home in Dorset to house migrants. The Mayor of Portland, Carolyn Parks, claims the Home Office is in breach of planning control due to the barge being on water. All asylum seekers who initially boarded back in August were evacuated after traces of Legionella bacteria were found on the barge. Fuel retailers have dismissed claims drivers are being overcharged at the pumps following a surge in prices. RAC data shows diesel shot up by more than 8 pence a litre in September, the fifth biggest monthly increase since the turn of the century. Unleaded also rose nearly 5 pence per litre to 157 pence. The motoring group's blaming the hikes on production cuts by the OPEC group of oil-producing nations and a weakening of the pound against the dollar. And researchers say a new robot could revolutionise checks for breast cancer. A team at the University of Bristol's developed a device with sensors that could detect lumps at greater depths. It's hoped the device could be rolled out to easily accessible locations so more women can get tested. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Manchester and back to Andrew and Beth.
So, good morning. The London Assembly member Andrew Boff was booted out of the Tory conference yesterday. He's apparently heckling Suella Braverman as she railed against gender ideology. This is what happened.
My name's Andrew Boff. I'm a member of the London Assembly.
But you're a Tory, aren't you?
I'm a loyal Tory for 50 years.
So why are you saying that to
Why are you saying trash about gender ideology is making our Conservative Party look transphobic and homophobic. This is not what the Conservative Party is about. We have a proud record of standing up.
So that was Andrew Boff, member of the London Assembly, and that man holding the phone in his face was our very own Chris Hope, getting the reaction.
Good story.
Just back up a bit for us, Chris. What was happening, and what did he do to elicit that sort of response?
Quite quietly, but talking while Suella Braverman was speaking about trans issues, gay rights, because there's a concern, isn't there, in the speech last week in Washington, when Suella Braverman went there and said that some people say they're going to come here because they're being persecuted, but just because there's issues with homosexuals or gay people in other countries, and is that a reason not to come here?
Yeah.
That clearly was his point, and then he was thrown out.
And he's a gay man.
He is.
He's a gay man. He's been a Tory Party member for 50 years.
50 years.
He's an elected Tory politician, one of the most senior chambers in the country. Yeah. London Assembly. He's an AM.
He's been the candidate to be Mayor of London.
Well, he's been tried to be the Tory candidate. He never got chosen, of course. But he's a guy who's well known in the Tory Party. To me, it looked heavy-handed. It wasn't Suella Braverman's fault. In fact, she said afterwards, "Let him back in, no problem here."
It's outrageous, in my opinion.
It felt a bit like, remember that? Who was that? That's the elderly protester.
It was in 2005, during a Jack Straw speech at the Home Secretary, and he was a Jewish man.
We were both there in the chamber.
We were, and they threw out a guy who was
Walter.
And he was 82,
That's
and he was manhandled out of the conference.
Yelling about the Iraq War.
It was.
And that became a symbol of the kind of suppressive nature of the Labour government.
Yeah, it did.
I don't know if that that'll happen in this case?
I think it probably might not, because Brabham was very quick to say, you didn't do it in my name. I wish you hadn't heckled. And she's sticking to guns, but she said he shouldn't have been thrown out, and she apologised.
Yeah, and I think that felt the right response from
Raymond. It did, but incredibly heavy-handed on the floor, though.
Yes.
Because I heard it, the bit that I saw, he sort of said, and he was quite quiet. It was quite hard to hear on the video.
And seated, Bev. He wasn't standing up.
He was sat on the end of the row, wasn't he? And he said, "There's no such thing as gender ideology. There's no such thing as gender ideology." Next thing, he's got a policeman right charge.
He looked absolutely bemused.
Dragging him down the road.
Well, to me, and I followed up with my camera, being a journalist, get the video for you guys for your programme. I think, to me, it says they were all kind of ready for something to happen. Suella Braverman is divisive out there. Just don't even look at Twitter for what you think about that. She did a big speech last week. You can imagine, if you're looking at the risk to this conference, Braverman's speech was a flashpoint. They were ready for something to happen. So I think let's not be too unfair to the security people. They thought, where's it going next? Let's deal with it.
But I was a bit concerned to see a police officer involved in this, because the Tories pay for the security.
Well, I walked out with the police.
Why is a police officer involved in that?
Well, I walked out with the police, as you saw, that was my hand filming it, and I filmed it for our viewers last night on the channel. I walked out with the cops, and I managed to leave this place without my pass, got stuck. But I did ask the police, are you arresting him? Because it's very important. Are you arresting him? No, we're moving him away from the conference. So he's not arrested. He was removed by police.
Inappropriate use of a police officer. More important thing.
He was hailed last night at a gathering of LGBTQI Tories, when he was hailed as this kind of person who spoke truth to power.
He got a standing ovation when he arrived.
Good for him, maybe.
Yeah, good for him. I've known Andrew for years, and he's a funny old cove, but he's a proper Tory, and he's entitled to chunter.
I wonder if he still is a proper Tory this morning. It would be interesting to know, wouldn't it?
He's always chuntering. And no one's chunked out of House of Commons.
He bellyache the whole way through people's speeches. Right. Anyway, well done for getting him.
Yeah, well done. Right, Chris, we've got this big speech today. This is the culmination of the event. It is noticeably quiet here. Now, this is probably a win from the RMT, because lots of people took cars and trains
that's
home
deliberate,
yesterday.
Bev. We've been discussing off air how we're getting home.
It's
We've got the good morning. We've got the GB News. Forgive me, GB News minibus. That's going to be quite fun. Lots of singing songs, jolly songs on the way back.
Listen, I'm getting old. Does it have a loo?
I'm not sure.
I'm not sure I could do 4 hours. I'm not sure I can go 4 hours without a loo stop.
We'll stop regularly for you, Andrew.
The driver might need a loo stop.
Your age,
my age, exactly.
This is the kind of chaos that the RMT want, don't they? They want Andrew Pearce holding his bladder.
My point, exactly.
But of course, such disruption. This cannot be coincidental that they've done this today.
And it's not. The leader of the drivers' union has said today they have targeted today being the day that
Saturday, of course.
And Saturday when we all came up. I mean, okay, we don't mind tiny violins. No one cares about journalists, nor should they. But it might have a bearing on who's in the audience. This is Rishi Sunak's first big speech as party leader. PM, maybe his last one, because there might be an election next May, June. It's a big moment. It's been a very quiet conference, dominated by what there's deciding now, which is stopping.
Here's a rumour I heard yesterday. General election on May the 6th, the same day as the London mayoral election.
That's more than a rumour, that's a reality, because I think they're spinning November election to leave May open as an option, because they are worried about next summer, small boats could get worse. The Paris Olympics, policing have withdrawn from the edge of the channel. More focus on so have a big summer of lots of small boats crossings. Rwanda may happen in November, may not work. Even worse, go early.
And if inflation is collapsed and done work, that would be a big thing for him.
Yes. And also, going long gives you longer for the trust debacle.
But also local elections, if they're terrible in May, that will look very bad for Rishi. So you get the local elections on the same day.
When you say it's more than a rumour, how sure can we be that that's what's going to happen?
Well, we can't be, because we're a long way away. What they're trying to do is keeping options open. It's like when you're planning a holiday next year. You want to go in May, but if things happen, I'll go in October. It's that kind of conversation.
How much warning do they have to give everybody for an election?
6 weeks legally.
6 weeks?
Well, you saw that, didn't you, in the 2017 election, when we were told by Theresa May in lobby, and I was told I was there for this meeting in the lobby, no one, not meant to mislead, we were told there was not going to be an election, don't panic. And then Theresa May went up a mountain in Brecon Beacons, came down and called an election.
And nearly lost it.
And
Just spell out for us then, Chris. Give me the 5 things that would need to happen. This is a bit mean. I know how you haven't prepped for this. Well, we can look at what his 5 pledges were, weren't they? Reduce the stop the boats, reduce the NHS waste,
only get 3
take down inflation. So go on. What's the 3?
He's going to get halving inflation, he's going to get debt falling, and he's going to get growth. He's not going to get cutting.
What if there is a...
Although they're down 20% because of the Albania deal, but nothing more than that.
What if there is a breakthrough on the boats?
They're just waiting list.
What if there is a breakthrough on the boats?
Well, he wants that.
If Rwanda works, it is a deterrent.
For the viewers, they know that there's a legal challenge. It starts in the Supreme Court, I think, next week. Next week. It runs to November, ruling before Christmas. If they rule it's legal to take people who arrive here illegally, process them in Rwanda, that's great news. That's a tick. It's not great news if it's not seen to be working. It's a gamble at the moment.
Yeah, that's right.
It's never been tried before in the world. They're trying to break the business model of people smugglers.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, it really does blow a hole in their policy.
Yeah.
Labour have nothing to say on this. They are talking about better cooperation with the EU.
That old lie.
Sharing.
Well, it's all they've got, right? And indeed, they might allow more people to come over, according to the briefing there by Keir Starmer. We're not sure that will happen. So I think, it's not clear yet. I think it's all options are open. So your original question is we don't know. That's why we're in journalism and politics.
Exactly.
And just one more question. If they do that, if they do host the general election on the same day as the London mayoral election, how does that why is that advantageous to the Conservatives?
It means there's more control, because the further you get back into next year, the more backed into a corner you are. By October, November, he's got nowhere to go. We can't really do a Christmas one.
But why the same day as the mayoral election?
It's a way,
is it a funding issue?
It saves money because elections cost around 30 or 40 million. If you do it on one day, you have the same numbers of polling people counting the votes. It's a way of saving some money. It means you can get all the bad or good news out at the same time. Andrew's forecasting their annihilation at the polls and locals. That's why you wouldn't go for June, you go for May. So it's going to be May or the autumn.
But of course, if they won May, if they won the London mayoral election,
which they might do,
which they might,
extraordinarily, despite the candidate being very weak.
They could then delay and go in June. Be a great launch pad.
They could do. Well, they did do May and June, didn't they? Back in the day, Tony Blair did in 2001. Remember that? After that, when his delay because of mad cow disease.
I think Susan Hall. People may say she's a weak candidate, but I think.
How dare you say she's weak, Christopher Hope? We had her in here. She's a friend of the show. I like her.
Yeah.
I like her. She's not spinny. She's not polished.
I like her, but
she's genuine and authentic.
But she's doing well despite her performances.
Yes, she is, and she looks like she hasn't got a lot of support.
She'll get better.
She hasn't got a lot of support. Right, still to come. Thanks, Chris. Great to see you. Now, still to come. One of us is going to have a little walk around the conference. Maybe me. Speak to some party members here on the floor. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning to you. It is 10:20. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. We are at the Conservative Party conference. Of course, expectation is growing, excitement is building. I do not josh, of course, because the Prime Minister will speak very shortly with his keynote speech, his first speech to the Tory Party conference as Prime Minister, some suggesting it may be his first and last speech to the Tory conference as Prime Minister. Joining me now is the Deputy Head of Conservative Home and great friend of this programme, Henry Hill. Henry, what's your overview of the conference so far? Has it been as bleak as you might think if you read The Guardian?
No, I think it's been really strange, actually, that I've said this to several people. This hasn't felt like the conference of a party that is about 15 points behind in the polls.
I quite agree with you.
A year out from a general election. Now, one of the more interesting theories I've had put to me for why that is it's because most of the MPs aren't here.
Yeah.
So
they don't want to pay £200 for a hotel room.
If you had if you had 150, 200 people who were all worried about losing their seats going around, they'd be killing the vibe.
Yeah.
So it has been remarkably sort of chipper in some respects. Not delusively so. I think there's generally an expectation that the next election will be hard, but
also we could compare it, if you like, to last year. Liz Truss, her premiership was imploding at this point last year.
Yeah. Well, again...
And she had about another 10 days to go, didn't she, after the Tory conference?
It feels so strange that was only a year ago.
Yeah, I know.
Here trying to work out how she could possibly balance those books.
Yeah.
No one could do it. I mean, I think Rishi Sunak does benefit a little bit from the fact that we're grading on a curve, right?
Yeah,
After the last few years of Conservative politics, his government isn't on fire or falling over.
No.
They'll go like, excellent, great baseline to do a conference.
Well, it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, this conference should have been a big success, in my view, for the Tories, because Rishi Sunak, the government, seems to have got its act together. Lots of announcements have been coming out, whether it's on net zero, but they've been completely, if you pardon the pun, derailed by this stupid row over HS2, which I've never seen the point of HS2 in the first place. But how could they possibly, Henry, all the way up to the Prime Minister's speech, they're squabbling over whether the Manchester line link happens, and we are in Manchester, and this is where we are sitting right now, is a former railway station.
I mean, the symbolism is extraordinarily potent, isn't it? As
it
you
is.
say, Manchester Central is a former railway station, which makes it all the worse. But I think Rishi's problem is that his operation is leaking like a sieve. Right?
Yeah, they tell me it's the civil servants. That's what they told me this week.
Quite probably, I wouldn't know, but it's exactly the same as what happened with his net zero announcements. It was supposed to be a big speech on Friday.
Yeah.
It leaked on, I think, the Monday.
Yeah.
This happened 2 days early.
They tried to bounce him.
Keeps happening over and over again. Now, it's interesting that we've seen Rishi doing some sort of emergency press stuff in the wake of that leak. Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, giving that furious press statement. But the government so far has just been holding the line. You know, they're saying HS2, it's not gone. The trains will run to Manchester, but they'll run on the existing crowded railway lines. But the interesting thing about the fact they're not pushing back suggests to me that what they think that Rishi's speech today will move the story on. And it'll be interesting to see why that might be.
And this is because the suggestion is that he's going to say, look, we're going to save 10 billion in the first phase by not pressing ahead. If we had Lord Barclay on yesterday, who did the independent review into HS2, he said, hang on, it would cost 180 billion, not the original 32 billion it would cost. But the suggestion is that the 10 billion will be invested in a east-west rail link.
So
across the Pennines.
Yeah, so it might be, and that is long overdue.
Long overdue.
One of the best points critics of HS2. I'm a pro of HS2, as you know, but one of the best points they've had is that there are so many rail projects in the Midlands, in Wales, the North, electrification, stuff like that. That's great. I think the problem is there's a reason HS2 ran over budget, and it's because everything in this country runs over budget. So why will that money be spent any better? Or will we not be here in 5 years' time talking about the utter fiasco of the Trans-Pennine?
Just explain to me, Henry, because why this country, this government, any government, cannot get major infrastructure projects sorted. I remember Gordon Brown's government invested in a big IT system in the NHS. They abandoned it after 12 billion had been lost and sunk into the project. Why are we so useless?
So there are two different types. The IT thing is basically we're incredibly bad at contract negotiation, right? Because we refuse to pay the proper salaries for someone with commercial contract experience. So they get their lunch eaten by private contractors, and that's the problem there. With the railways, if you look at France, Germany, most other countries that build it, they really don't consult. The government decides there's going to be a railway, and then that railway happens, right? Whereas in the UK, we consult endlessly. And I think particularly with HS2, the politicians need to take a share of the blame here, right? But you mentioned the 30 billion figure, the original figure for HS2.
Yeah, 32 billion.
That number was nonsense.
Plucked out of thin air.
Because HS2 Limited didn't even have access to the land to survey the land along the route until the legislation had passed. And they had to give a number before that bill was tabled. So they plucked it out of the air. And then MPs added thousands of additional requirements onto HS2 Limited about what they could and couldn't do. So the idea that a number produced before that law came into effect was always just going to be fiction.
Liam Halligan, our business editor, was telling us on the programme just a moment ago, Henry, that Alistair Darling was the minister who put the HS2 company into law, and he said to Liam very recently, well, I never thought they'd ever do it. It was a Labour scheme. They lost the election. The Tories could have abandoned it.
I mean, they could have abandoned it. The thing is, we do need new infrastructure. But there's other things. There was a fascinating letter from the chairman of HS1 recently. He says he desperately tried to have meetings with HS2 Limited and the government, never got them. And he said, you know what he did? He didn't tell the contracting companies his budget. Whereas HS2, he said they told everyone how much money the project had, which meant every bit, the people, the railway, they all came back with projects that cost vastly more because they wanted as big a share of the pie as possible. And he said in this letter, look, I never told anyone my budget, and we delivered HS1 under budget and 6 weeks early.
Amazing, isn't it? How damaging for the Conservatives is the... we know it's going to be cancelled, London to Manchester. We do know that now. How damaging for the Conservative Party is that, if at all?
If at all. I mean, it's not going to really hit many of their sort of core voters in the election. They're fighting this next election very defensively, given where they are in the polls, and I don't think there's going to be that many voters who are going to switch. The problem with things like HS2 is it joins up Labour cities and it runs through Tory shires, right? That's always the problem with railway for the Tories. But it has deeply alienated people like Andy Street, the Mayor of the West Midlands, and it's angered, I think, younger Conservatives. There's a group called Britain Remade who had a fringe the other day that was packed, and everyone was chanting, get things built, right? There's a growing sense within the party that actually cancelling HS2, precisely because we're not doing anything about the things that make infrastructure fail, which means that potentially all of these extra things we're going to spend the money on instead will also be fiascos. There's a sense that actually it's just turning us into a national embarrassment.
Very interesting. Henry Hill, you're here for the Prime Minister's speech.
I am.
He's not a great orator, is he?
No, but they slowly improve over time, generally speaking, as long as the set doesn't fall down.
I don't think Theresa May ever improved.
Well, she only had one speech.
Yeah, well, that was enough. That's Henry Hill, Deputy Editor of Conservative. Now, Bev, you're out and about on the conference floor. I suspect it's not as busy as it was yesterday.
Thank you, Andrew. It is so much quieter here today. Normally, on the day of a conference, when the Prime Minister is going to be speaking, people will hang around because that, of course, is the main event of the week. I said weekend. It feels like a weekend. So it's much quieter. There are no queues today for the coffee shops. There are loads of spaces to get things to eat. All of the stands are still here, but nowhere near the footfall of traffic. This is, of course, because of the train strikes. Lots of people having to get coaches back. Everything's booked up to get back from Manchester to their hometown. I want to talk to these ladies. This is Alex and Carlotta. Now, this stand is Alzheimer's Society. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning.
Why would you want to be here this weekend? Just explain to people this week what this event means for you and what do you want to get across to the politicians?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a brilliant opportunity for us to get direct FaceTime time with all of our stakeholders, members of Parliament. We've spoken to 75 MPs during the conference, which is fantastic. What we want people to take away is that dementia is the UK's biggest killer. So 900,000 people live with dementia in the UK right now. That's going to rise to 1.6 million people by 2040. It's vital that the government makes sure it uses the major condition strategy, its new big bit of policy, to make sure that we're driving up dementia diagnosis rates, gathering better data on dementia and improving the pathway for people with dementia too.
So this event allows you to really have face-to-face contacts with politicians in the way that you couldn't really get if they're down in Westminster and they're busy. But not only that, you've been testing them, haven't you?
We have indeed. We have indeed. We've got our fantastic Dementia Maze game just here. So this is actually a cognitive stimulation tool that people with dementia can use. What's good for the heart is good for the head and vice versa. So it's really important that people with dementia keep the mind active. We've been getting MPs to have a go at this maze.
So what do you do here? Is it twisting it?
Do you want to have a little go?
Well, I don't know if I should go on the. I will have a go, Alex.
All right.
But let's have a look at the leaderboard here. So to just explain to us. Okay, you hold my mic for me while you tell us what this is. Go on.
Yeah. So as I say, it's our Dementia Maze game. We've been getting MPs to take this ball all the way to this corner and back again. You would be amazed. Well, maybe not amazed at the level of competitiveness that MPs have shown to have a go.
Of course.
Yeah, I know.
So just talk us through the board here. Talk us through the board. What have you got on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got Stuart Anderson MP right at the top, had a few goes. We've got people that have been return visitors to the stand. Jane Stevenson, very competitive indeed. And it's a great way to bring people in. So, you know, the best thing we can do is get people feeling competitive. I know that MPs have been WhatsApping each other about their scores. So, yeah.
and so you start with the ball in the maze.
Yes, indeed. So basically what you need to do, you've got your ball in the corner here, and then you are sort of just navigating your way around. And as I was saying earlier, this is basically a metaphor for the twists and turns that people can face in accessing the right care and support for dementia, and just using that as our conversation starter for people. So going round and round, as you can see, I've been fairly well practiced, although I'm cheating by using two hands. So
okay, so you have to use one hand,
indeed,
and then it taps into the cognitive abilities of your dexterity and then your memory to remember which direction to take the ball.
Indeed. So like I was saying, this is a product that is actually available on Alzheimer's Society's website. It's a great way to keep the mind active. That's really important. With dementia, you want to make sure that you're keeping your brain active, keeping social. That's a great way to kind of continue to live well.
And I love this. I love the fact that you've got the board going. And how competitive were they?
Very competitive. As I said earlier, you probably wouldn't be surprised to hear quite how competitive people have been. Great way to get people to keep coming back to the stand. Yeah. So,
and Carlotta, for you, how's this week been? Interesting, meeting lots of different people. It's quiet today.
Absolutely, it's been interesting. It's my first time at party conference, so yeah, very interesting and great to have some of that face-to-face conversations with politicians. Yeah.
And you feel that they were listening to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we've had some really fantastic conversations. Got lots of MPs committing to take action and go away and look at the information we've given them. So
great, fantastic. Really well, maybe I'll bring one of these down for you, Andrew, in just a moment. Thank you, ladies. Good to see you. I'm just going to walk down here. Oh, I think it's time to go back to Andrew. I'm going to stay here and have a go and test myself. Andrew, back to you.
All right, Bev, thank you. And we've got a bit of breaking news because Cabinet Ministers, according to GB political staff, are meeting right now to sign off on axing the HS2 Northern Link from London to Manchester. The route's going to be cancelled. The £10 billion will be spent on 50 transport projects across the north of England. Sorry, I probably just spoilt the big surprise in the Prime Minister's speech. Here's the news now with Rhiannon.
Oh, yes.
It's 10:32. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB Newsroom. And yes, as Andrew said there in that breaking news, an urgent meeting's being held by Cabinet Ministers to sign off the axing of the northern leg of the HS2. GB News understands that the route between Manchester and Birmingham will be cancelled and £10 billion spent on 50 transport projects across the north of England. Rishi Sunak set to defend the move when he addresses his party's conference at lunchtime. The Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, says the decision will leave people in the north as second-class citizens. Defence Minister Grant Shapps says the government's still committed to levelling up.
if he were to scrap, and it's the second leg of HS2 we're talking about, and take that money, you can't really judge it without finding out where that money is going to be spent, because that could actually have a fantastic levelling up opportunity. It's billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds. So what could that be spent on? And perhaps there are things which are worthwhile doing more than building a high-speed rail line, given COVID, given what's happened since, given the change in travel patterns.
And also in the last few minutes, Turkey has withdrawn its bid to host the 2028 Euros, meaning a joint bid by the UK and the Republic of Ireland now stands unopposed. Turkey has agreed to merge its bid with Italy for 2032. The bid needs to be officially approved by UEFA's Executive Committee next week. And 10 stadiums were selected, including Glasgow's Hampden Park, the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Dublin's Aviva Stadium, and Wembley in London. Those attending the conference may well struggle to get home today because of train strikes. The disruption means much of the country is without services. Members of the drivers' union ASLEF have walked out in a long-running dispute over pay. The rail delivery group and the government say there's a fair and reasonable deal on the table. And fuel retailers have dismissed claims drivers are being overcharged at the pumps following a surge in prices. RAC data shows diesel shot up by more than 8p a litre in September. That's the fifth biggest monthly increase since the turn of the century. Unleaded also rose nearly 5 pence per litre to 157p. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2113 and €1.1552. The price of gold is £1,505.13 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,479 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
And it's 10:39. You're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner at the Tory conference. The excitement, it's palpable, Bev, isn't it? Because we're just barely an hour away now from Rishi Sunak's keynote speech. Everybody will be hanging on his every word, ish.
And he's going to be introduced by his wife.
He is.
I'm really torn about that.
It's not the first time, and it suggests to me a Prime Minister who knows he's in a bit of political trouble. He's trying to show his human side because Gordon Brown's wife, Sarah, very nice woman, PR woman, regularly introduced him. Much good it did them, because he lost the election anyway.
It just seems a bit sort of old-fashioned to have your wife up there, especially. Also, bear in mind, his wife's family are the billionaires, and this is the criticism which is often levelled at Rishi Sunak, that he doesn't appeal to the electorate because how can he possibly know what it's like to not be able to fill your mortgage
And I think the theory is, this is what someone told me last night about it, they said get her out on stage so people can see that she's a very nice woman, she sounds ordinary, she dresses ordinary, and people won't think her anymore as the billionaire's daughter.
I don't think we're that stupid.
And also, Labour are going to play that card the whole time, particularly if they start tinkering with inheritance tax, of course, because Rishi and his family would do very well. Joined her here in Manchester, of course, with Charlie Rowley, former political advisor to Michael Gove. You've been through all these speeches a million times, and probably one of the youngest members of the Conservative Party at the conference, Milton Danchuk. Milton, you've been on the programme before. How is this your first conference?
Yes, it is.
And has it put you off politics forever?
No, not yet.
Right. What is your impression?
It's been amazing, going around all the stalls, seeing obviously speeches from Suella Braverman, but no, it's been really incisive and learning loads of different things about different topics.
And you're 15, aren't you, Milton?
Yeah, 15.
Yeah. Should you not be at school today?
Luckily, they let me have time off, so...
They've let you have time off for the conference?
Yeah,
I suppose it's about engagement, and we want young people engaging, because you're a great champion of the idea of voting at 16, aren't you?
No, I'm against it.
Very interesting. Even after being here for a week, you don't think now you should have a vote at the general election, which could be as soon as May?
No, I don't. I think it's not broken. Why change it? I think Labour are obviously really for it, and I just think it's a bit... kind of gerrymandering of votes.
Well, we were saying actually, Charlie, how many young people there are at this conference. More than you would expect. Lots of teenagers. And yes, there have been, I guess, get-togethers from kids who are studying politics here, and they've come to have a look around. But it does show that idea that the Conservative Party are all pensioners. It's not actually true.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's a really good thing to open up the doors and allow everybody to come in to be engaged in the political process. It's not just about what you see on the television. You always see the green benches in the House of Commons, and you see those debates and the Punch and Judy politics across the dispatch box, but actually being able to come to a conference where you're up close and personal and you see cabinet ministers rushing through, you can actually get a sense of the importance and the leaders of people that run the country.
And you know, Charlie Rowley, you're a veteran of conferences, which is why you've got such a hoarse voice. Because you've had quite a few late nights, haven't you?
Well, I think. How
many late nights have you had?
I've been working incredibly hard.
Is that what it is?
And day.
Yeah. I have been very sensible this week because I've got to do Labour next week in Liverpool. The latest I've been to bed this week is 11:30.
Well done.
That would be the earliest you've been to bed. Yes.
I look. Time when you're at conference, it's like time escapes you.
It's a blur.
You go
It's
because
a blur.
it's such it's such an important thing, and it's such a brilliant event when you're seeing people.
Milton too young to be in the bars, of course.
But the great thing about Milton, why Milton's here, and you hit the nail on the head, Bev, is because you hope that in the Prime Minister's speech there will be policies that reach out to everybody, whether it's protecting the triple lot for pensioners, all the way down to young people, whether it's about housing, getting on the housing ladder, whether it's about education, whether it's about apprenticeships, whatever it is, the Prime Minister needs to set out a whole raft of measures to appeal to everybody right across the country.
Well, in this speech, which is going to be just less than an hour from now, actually, Rishi Sunak has said that he's going to, what we know is he said he's going to change the status quo. What does he mean?
Well, I think he's going to present himself as the individual that can, A, take the long-term decisions in the national interest, what the country is, but also be the candidate for change. That is something that comes up time and time again, apparently, in focus groups that are being polled. He's the man.
But hang on a minute. If you've been in power for 13 years and you're saying what we need is a lot of change, that's not a great message, is it?
But I think it's about, well, I think we certainly want a change from the last couple of years, because there's been obviously the internal party politics. The Conservative Party hasn't had the best, hasn't demonstrated the best of itself, I don't think, over the last couple of years.
That's a very diplomatic thing, Charlie. Milton, what do you think of Rishi Sunak? As a young man, 15, you're still at school, do you see him as a great leader, an inspirational leader?
Yeah, I think he's amazing. Obviously,
do you?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he is relatively young for Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I think he's the youngest one we've had in quite a while.
I think ever. I think he's
younger than Tony Blair, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's younger than Tony Blair was, yeah.
But no, I think obviously he's facing a lot of diversion in
division.
I've been going to fringe events, and there's the CDO, they're more right wing. There's
the Conservative Democratic Organisation.
And so I think we just need to unify and back him. He's a good leader. He's not had the job for a while, but I think he's done a good job so far.
Right. What does your dad think of you being at the Tory conference? Your dad, of course, was a Labour MP for many years.
Yeah. I think he supports me. I think he likes I'm getting into politics.
Yeah.
And I think he likes it's through a different party.
I do remember, William Hague, I think was 15 when he made that speech to the Tory conference in 1977, as Mrs Thatcher looked at him while he made the speech. It haunted him for the rest of his political career, didn't it?
Well, it was always a reference.
So this clip, Milton, be careful. We're going to be playing this in 10 years when you're Prime Minister.
He sort of had this rather irritating Yorkshire accent, and he sort of spoke like that, and he had terrible hair, and Mrs Thatcher looked bemused at this weirdo, and of course had to say, oh, this is the future of the Tory party. She was thinking, who the hell is this guy? So Milton, a bit of advice, don't go on the platform.
Well, he did go on to become the Foreign Secretary, though, and leader of the party.
That went well. How did you do as leader of the party? Labour had the biggest landslide in their history, and in the 2001 election, the Tories gained 1 seat under William Hague. Thanks, William.
Well, that's why it's important, and you can learn lessons from those elections, and Rishi Sunak and the team will be making sure that going into the next general election, and of course, it is to make sure that
Rishi Sunak succeeded William Hague as the Richmond MP in Yorkshire.
Exactly so.
Wow. Can we talk about the strong women we've had on stage this week, boys, as I sit here with you all? Kemi Badenoch and Suella Braverman have been the standout speeches of this week. Suella yesterday was very impressive, Charlie. What would you predict for her personally in politics?
Well, you never make predictions in politics, overly predictions in politics. But she's clearly a very, very strongly opinionated woman. She's got, she wants to get a grip of the Home Office. There are so many failures in the Home Office. I think we can all recognise that. Even, it goes back to John Reid, Labour Home Secretary, that said
it wasn't fit for purpose.
It's not fit for purpose, and it still isn't. And I think what she's trying to do is she's come in, she's talked tough on things that really matter to people right across the country, and that is immigration, which was back in Cameron's days. You remember? Going from 100,000s to the tens of thousands. That hasn't been achieved. I think she wants to get a grip on
what Bev's getting at, what is the future for her? If there is a leadership election next year, if the Tories lose, is she a serious contender to be leader?
Well, I think there is so much talent in the Conservative Party.
Why are you sitting on the fence? Why are you sitting on the fence?
I think there
is GP News. We don't sit on the fence here.
But there is so much.
But in a way, I think
so much talent in the Conservative Party.
Well, I'm not sure there's that much. Well, there is.
I couldn't possibly sort of throw my way. But what I would say about Suella, just to conclude, is
you don't want her to be leader.
Well, I think
that's what you mean.
What you've got to do, and this again, it's all about learning the lessons. We talked about William Hague and but you've got to learn lessons about all of the issues that have happened. So Liz Truss did not have a broad church when she put her cabinet together. It was just a cabinet full of Trussites, and that sort of ended, as we all know. So Suella, if she wants to become leader, if she's got leadership ambitions, I think it's all well being talking tough and appealing to perhaps the right of the party, but she needs to open up and appeal to the left as well.
What do you think, Milton? Do you see her as a future Tory leader?
Yeah, 100%. Her, Kemi Badenoch, Priti Patel, all contenders, and I think.
Which of the three would you vote for? Oh. You've got to vote. Don't sit on the fence like this bloke.
That's a good question, actually. It's between. Look, my top three are Priti Patel, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, and Kemi Badenoch.
Which one would be the top of the list?
Suella Braverman.
Interesting.
Isn't it interesting?
Young vote for from the teenagers.
Yeah, and just remarkable actually, because what struck me being here this week, it's not easy to even become an MP, is it? The resilience required to be knocking on doors, to be carrying clipboards, to be selected by your local association. Thank you, that's what I'm looking for. To be selected, to go through the hustings, to get the seat, to be elected, to maybe not be elected, and try again. These women that we're talking about in those three potential leaders of the Conservative Party have put the hard yards in. People think on the outside, Charlie, that you just become an MP because you know the right people and you get given a seat. It doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. And we were talking yesterday about Susan Hall and women in politics, and it is a disgrace and a scourge on our politics in life that women do get a harder time in terms of the press. They get a harder time, it seems, in terms of the abusive emails and online social media and all the rest of it. So to be able to do exactly what you've said, put your head above the parapet as a woman in politics, to want to make a change and a difference for your communities for the better, to go through all of that process and tackle that abuse, it is a tough gig. So
It is interesting because people ask me who would be in the race to be the next Tory leader if Sunak goes down to defeat next time. The three I put two. I'd be Braverman versus
Badenoch. Yeah.
Women.
Yeah.
So we could have a fourth Tory woman leader, which would be an extraordinary achievement.
Let's find out what Peter Edwards think, friend of the channel and former editor of Labourlist. Good morning, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us. So just on that topic we've been discussing with those potential leaders of the party, who would you think would do the best job for the Conservatives if you narrow it down to Suella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch?
Well, as a Labour voter, I'm a bit of a mystified observer, but I do feel Suella Braverman's gone a bit too far, and I think Kemi Badenoch has the support from the right of the party and the Eurosceptic wing, very long established. She's energetic, she's ideas, and she's a bit more measured in the way she speaks as well. So if Labour were fortunate enough to win, I think she could be a formidable opponent.
Well, we're leaping ahead now. Let's talk about what's going to happen in the next half an hour here in Manchester. Rishi Sunak's got to take to that stage. He's got to talk to the association members here in the hall, who, of course, didn't vote him into that position. He's got to win them over. But he's also got to win over the rest of the nation. What does he need to say?
Well, I mean, I've no idea, to be honest. I'm very puzzled by going to Manchester to announce cuts to a railway to Manchester. And then I'm very puzzled even more so by the fact that the Tory media department has allowed this speculation to dominate the whole week. And we've really finally had confirmation this morning that the further leg of HS2 will be scrapped to Manchester. Clearly, he's going to announce other things like investment in regional transport. Electrification across the north probably seems quite good. A bit of money for buses, and this constant refrain we get about is somebody studies the data and makes long-term decisions. My question is, where's the vision? And when you're scrapping something very big like HS2, how do you knit it into a story about your priorities when the number one concern is cost of living?
But surely it's a sensible decision to cut the project at this stage, which we're spending £110 billion to service our debt alone at the moment. And if this project is going to cost us several more billion, isn't it sensible, Peter? And there's been a lot of opposition against HS2 to say, enough, we're not going to carry that on now.
Well, I'm a bit agnostic about HS2 itself, but having lived in Leeds and Carlisle and York, I do believe you do need massive investment, particularly in electrification. The problem is that all politicians say, let's invest in the big stuff, called capital projects, and accounting for that is different in terms of the government's books and records. But then when you have austerity or any period of restraint, it's capital projects We saw it with Michael Gove 10 years ago and building schools in the future. Capital projects that gets cut. Yet they're the things that are meant to make us all rich in the future. And then we do finally do a project like HS2. It comes out a much more equivalent, much more expensive rather, compared to our European equivalents like France. But a Prime Minister can't get up there and say, let's be more like France, can he?
Yeah, OK, Peter, thank you. Always good to see you. Peter Edwards there.
Last word with these two boys. The speech coming. Mark's out of 10 for this Tory conference. You've been coming to Tory conference for years. Mark's out of 10.
He doesn't mean the social life, Charlie. He means that...
You're giving 11. No, come on, be objective. Be a bit... What do you really think?
Well, I think, look, it's been well, I think you can only answer that honestly after the PM speech, because that will be the focus.
Sure.
We haven't seen that many policies that have come out in the hall this week. The weather's been great. There's been a bit of a sapping of energy because of HS2. So until the Prime Minister gets up and delivers, I hope to be a policy-filled, packed with ideas, packed with change, then I think that will just lift everybody, and it will be a 10 out of 10 performance from the Prime Minister.
I thought you'd say something like that. Let's have an objective assessment from you. Your first conference.
7 out of 10.
7? That's an interesting response.
The speeches have been amazing. It's been really insightful. Like you said, I haven't seen the Prime Minister's speech. That could go up. But no, it's been amazing.
And have you got a ticket in the hall for the speech?
Yes.
Well done, you.
Right. Thank you, gentlemen. Great to see you. Now, in the next few moments, we're going to speak to our political editor, Tom Harwood, on his predictions for the big speech. We are Britain's Newsroom on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good morning. We have a north-south split in our weather today. Here's your latest GB News weather bulletin. I'm Alex Berkill. We are going to see some wet weather already across western parts of Scotland, feeding further eastwards across many parts as we go through the day, but the heaviest rain will always be across western areas, where we're likely to see totals building up, some localised flooding and disruption to travel here. Elsewhere across many parts of the UK, there will be some showers around, perhaps not as many as we saw yesterday, and they probably won't be quite as intense, and there's a lower chance of seeing some thunder too. The winds will be slightly less strong, and with temperatures reaching highs around 19, possibly 20 Celsius, it should feel relatively warm in any sunny breaks. Through the end of the day, we are going to see any showers dying out, but there will still be some outbreaks of rain around. You can see some rain across parts of northern England into Northern Ireland, and some rain pushing into parts of Wales and the southwest, and then another swathe of wet weather feeding across Scotland as we go through the early hours of Thursday. But because of the cloud and rain, it is likely to be a milder night than it has been recently, for many places at least. As we go through Thursday then, quite a cloudy, damp picture across particularly western, northwestern parts, brighter towards the east, but even here I am expecting the cloud to fill in a little bit as we go into the afternoon. More wet weather then pushing its way in from the west and the northwest, and so it is going to turn increasingly wet, particularly across western parts of Scotland as we go through Thursday and into Friday. Temperatures for many similar to today.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 PM for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 PM and repeated every morning at 5 AM. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 PM every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, welcome back to the Tory Party conference here in Manchester. Rishi Sunak is almost certainly expected to announce that HS2 will be scrapped.
He will. The Prime Minister will make the announcement in his speech. There's been an urgent cabinet meeting this morning to sign off the decision to scrap the Northern Link. Some say it's a political gaffe from Rishi Sunak. Not us.
Beggars belief in some ways that they are about to do this. To pull that plug here in Manchester would show complete contempt for the people of this city region and of the north of England as a whole.
More strikes. Today's the first ever joint strike action by rail workers and the NHS, with train drivers walking out on the last day of the Conservative Party conference. And it's about half an hour until the Prime Minister gets on the stage here in Manchester to tell you his vision for your country. I want to hear from you as well this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. First of all, though, here is the very latest news with Rhiannon Jones.
Bev, thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 11. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. And we start with some breaking news. A murder investigation has been launched after a dog believed to be an XL bully killed a man in Sunderland. Police responded just before 7 o'clock last night following reports a dog had injured a 54-year-old. A 44-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. The dog was destroyed at the scene. A second dog has been seized. And we'll bring you more on that as we get it. An urgent meeting is being held by Cabinet Ministers to sign off the axing of the northern leg of the HS2. GB News understands the route between Manchester and Birmingham will be cancelled and that £10 billion will be spent on 50 transport projects across the north of England instead. Rishi Sunak set to defend the move when he addresses his party's conference shortly. Defence Minister Grant Shapps says the government is still committed to levelling up.
If he were to scrap, and it's the second leg of HS2 we're talking about, and take that money, you can't really judge it without finding out where that money is going to be spent, because that could actually have a fantastic levelling up opportunity. It's billions of pounds, tens of billions of pounds. So what could that be spent on? And perhaps there are things which are worthwhile doing more than building a high-speed rail line, given COVID, given what's happened since, given the change in travel patterns.
Meanwhile, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, says the move will break multiple Tory manifesto pledges.
It isn't too late from our point of view. You could invite us in. We are prepared to discuss ways in which this could be done to provide that east-west infrastructure first. But do not pull the plug on this city while you are in this city. Do not pull the plug on the north of England. Do not treat people here as second-class citizens when it comes to transport, because if you do those things, people here will never forget.
Well, those attending the conference may well struggle to get home again, as large parts of the train network are at a standstill today. Thousands of rail workers are on strike. The disruption means much of the country will be without services, and those that are running will start later and finish earlier. Members of Drivers' Union ASLEF have walked out in a long-running dispute over pay. The rail delivery group and the government say there's a fair and reasonable deal on the table. But ASLEF's General Secretary Mick Whelan says the offer was designed to fail.
As you've seen this week, these people don't care. They don't want a resolution. They deliberately set up the last deal to fail by putting all our red lines within it, knowing we couldn't accept it, and they do not want to talk to us at all. They want this to go on.
Consultants, as well as junior doctors, meanwhile, are on their third and final day of unprecedented strike action. Many hospitals are operating on Christmas Day style cover. It's the longest strike in the dispute for consultants, whilst junior doctors are threatening further walkouts later this year. The BMA is demanding a return of negotiations, but the government says this year's 6% pay rise is final. Elsewhere, officials in Italy say foreign nationals are among the 21 people who died after a bus crashed off a flyover near Venice last night. Ukrainian, German, French and Croatian tourists are understood to have been on board. They were on their way to a campsite in the district of Mestre. 18 people have also been injured after the coach fell 15 metres onto electricity lines before bursting into flames. The cause of the accident is still unclear. Venice's mayor has described the scene as apocalyptic. Today is the deadline for the Home Office to respond to a legal challenge on the use of the Bibby Stockholm barge in Dorset to house migrants. The Mayor of Portland, Carolyn Parks, claims the Home Office is in breach of planning control due to the barge being on the water. All asylum seekers who initially boarded back in August were evacuated after traces of Legionella bacteria were found on board. Fuel retailers have dismissed claims drivers are being overcharged at the pumps following a surge in prices. RAC data shows diesel shot up by more than 8 pence a litre in September. That's the 5th biggest monthly increase since the turn of the century. Unleaded also rose nearly 5 pence. The motoring group's blaming the hikes on production cuts by the OPEC group of oil-producing nations and a weakening of the pound against the dollars. And Turkey has withdrawn its bid to host the 2028 Euros, meaning a joint bid by the UK and the Republic of Ireland now stands unopposed. Italy and Turkey have agreed to merge bids for 2032. The joint bid needs to be officially approved by UEFA's Executive Committee next week. 10 stadiums were selected, including Glasgow's Hampden Park, the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Dublin's Aviva Stadium and Wembley in London. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now let's cross over to Manchester and back to Andrew.
Well, Rishi Sunak will shortly be delivering his first speech to the Conservative Party conference since becoming Prime Minister.
The PM is going to announce the scrapping of HS2's northern leg.
The route's going to be cancelled. We know he's going to announce £10 billion on 50 transport projects across the north of England.
So our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, is with us now. Morning, Tom. And we're also joined by Penny Gaines, the chair of the Stop HS2 campaign group. Great to see you both. Tom, let me come to you. What do we know at the moment about these extra routes which are going to be offered to appease the North? Because it sounds to me, as a Northern girl, like a good news story.
Well, we don't know anything at all about the 50 specific projects that we know the Prime Minister will announce. It's likely that there'll be more fast delivering projects. We've heard a lot of rumours about roads, about buses, about sorts of things that might be ready actually in time for the next election. Perhaps this is a bit of a short-termist strategy from the Prime Minister, despite the slogan of this conference being long-term decisions for a brighter future. But of course, the big question mark is Northern Powerhouse Rail. That's the new proposed east-west link to connect Liverpool to Manchester to Leeds. Will that be part of this package? I think that's unlikely, given that £10 billion for 50 projects doesn't give much money towards that east-west link. If we look at how much was spent on Crossrail in London, the Elizabeth line, that was £10 billion for one railway going east to west. £10 billion for 50 projects, it doesn't sound like it's going to be much railway apart from electrification, the sort of incremental upgrades of existing lines.
But if it's 50 projects, that could be affecting 50 constituencies. That's quite clever politics, because that's going to be on the front pages of every local newspaper. It's going to be on local, regional TV and radio.
That's certainly what the Prime Minister has been looking at. We're looking at short-term political expediency. No matter how many times he says he's taking long-term decisions,
they never do.
And no doubt he will say this repeatedly throughout this speech. This is about taking long-term decisions. No, this seems that this decision, this centrepiece decision of his speech, is about short-term political expedience.
So for that 10 billion quid, what you're saying is some of those northern towns, Leeds, Liverpool, Manchester, etc., will just get new buses, new roads. It's something they can do quickly and will make an impact to those communities.
I think that's highly, highly likely.
Right.
We do know that the government has already committed, though, to a mass transit system in Leeds. Perhaps some of this money will go towards that. That's something that Michael Gove announced back when he was announcing the new housing agenda of this government, because Leeds is the largest city in Europe to not have a mass transit system. In fact, it used to. It used to have some trams back in the day, but they were ripped out.
And so if this happens, that'll be the ultimate levelling up.
Yes,
that's what the Tories will say.
They will say that, although there are some big questions still to answer. Clearly, there's a lot of pressure within the Conservative Party. The Northern Research Group of Conservative MPs have been pushing for this east-west rail link, Northern Powerhouse Rail. They want it to be called the Charles Line, to reflect the Elizabeth Line down in London, connecting those major northern cities. But as I say, as in King Charles. Right. But as I say, it seems unlikely, given the number of projects we're expecting this funding to go towards, that there will be that centrepiece, long-term piece of infrastructure. After all, I suppose if you're the Prime Minister and you're thinking about what's going to cause benefits to your cause within 12 months, it's not going to be an entirely new railway.
Penny Gaines from Stop HS2 campaign. Is this all your fault?
Oh, I hope so. Yeah, we've been campaigning for quite some time, and one of the alternatives we always said is that you could build a lot more smaller projects that would bring more benefit to more people more quickly. And if that's what Rishi Sunak says in his speech, we'll be very pleased about that. But
tell us why. What did you object to fundamentally? The cost, the destruction of nature and houses? What was your main objection?
We had three main objections. First of all, the business case. We've always said that video conferencing and digital technologies are the alternative to HS2. And as we expected it to be our children's generation when they came into the workforce, but as we saw with the pandemic, a lot of people suddenly found that they could work from home. Changed everything. And of course, the second factor was the environment. The HS2 won't reduce carbon emissions for 120 years after opening. It will still be causing increased carbon emissions. It goes through huge swathes of the countryside,
Which is appalling, isn't it? Digging up all that gorgeous, glorious green countryside. Appalling.
It is, and we're hoping that that if Rishi Sunak announces that HS2, well, our real hope is that he'll cancel the whole lot. But that's possibly a bit of a stretch.
What do you mean cancel the whole lot?
Phase 1 as well. but I don't think that's going to happen
already built,
today.
though, isn't it?
A lot of it's already built. A lot of it's already tunnelled. The Prime Minister says repeatedly there are spades in the ground. Track has been laid.
And we'll get to Birmingham 10 minutes quicker. And then that's going to cost £20 billion.
Well, the extraordinary thing about this is the most difficult and the most expensive bit is the London to Birmingham bit, because that's the key that then unlocks the fork. And of course, the leg to Leeds was already cancelled earlier in the rail review last year, and now this leg up to Manchester appears to be cancelled. It really does undermine the business case for the first leg as well. But of course, at the start of all of this was going to cost around £30 billion. Now we're looking at it being north of £100 billion. Although, to some extent, the blame can be laid at the foot of Conservative MPs who have said there's lots of lovely, gorgeous countryside. The Chilterns are very, very pretty. So they have created tunnels and cut and cover and noise reduction and wildlife preservation, cycle tracks and all the rest of it, all the way along the route, making it one of the most expensive railways in the world. And the curious thing is, when the Victorians built railways, they didn't mind a viaduct going over countryside. In fact, in some ways, that could have improved the vistas and certainly given you better phone signal on the train. It's very curious that this is now going to deliver, by some estimates, only 7 minutes of sunlight between London and Birmingham.
Because so much of it is underground.
So much of it is underground or cut down.
More underground, I think, than the Channel Tunnel. Penny, you didn't tell us what your third objection was.
The third objection is the cost. We've always said it's a hugely expensive project, and like Tom was saying, it started off at 30 billion, it's going sort of 100 billion.
Well, Lord Berkeley told us yesterday, he did the independent review into HS2, you probably know Lord Berkeley.
Yes.
He said it would be near £180 billion. Unbelievable.
It is unbelievable.
6 times higher than what was the original estimate.
Yeah. And the other thing that we've just found out very recently is HS2 Limited didn't want to let people know what the cost of Phase 2B would be until royal assent. So they're trying to hide the costs, and they've already done that in 2019 with Nusrat Ghani. She came to Parliament and she told, when she was Transport Minister, she said, the budget's 55 billion. She knew at the time that it wasn't going to come in at that cost. She knew it was going to go up, and that's when it went up to 106 billion. And like Tony says, it could be 180. We just don't know how much the total.
How are you going to celebrate? Because you've won. I know you're not going to kill off Phase 1, but you've won the main part of your argument.
I haven't quite got that far. I mean, I came up to Manchester on Sunday on the train. I wasn't expecting the noise about HS2 to be quite so loud, so I've been really busy this week.
Why did you get involved with it in the first place, Penny, briefly? What's your interest?
Well, I lived in Buckinghamshire at the time. I now live near Bournemouth. So, of course, when you live close to something like that, you look at the details. And when you look at the details, it was a bad project. So people have talked about it was very much...
It's going to affect your area, basically.
Yeah, I mean, that was part of it.
Yeah.
But if it had been a good project, I'd have said, well...
Yeah, you might have been in support of it. Well, Rishi Sunak, I think, is on his way. We're going to get live pictures of the Prime Minister. He's heading into the Conservative Party conference. There he is. Oh, his wife has chosen to wear the same suit as me.
She must have known.
Well,
she must have known.
You know, flattery, what is it? Imitation is the biggest form of flattery. She's wearing a pink trouser suit.
And we think she's going to break with tradition for the Tories, certainly by introducing him on the stage. That will be a speaking role for the Tory partner, the Prime Minister's partner. First time ever, I would think, at a Tory conference. Labour did it a lot with Gordon Brown. I don't think David Cameron's wife Samantha ever did it. And Theresa May's husband Philip, the man from CNA, he certainly didn't.
That's right. So this is Akshata Murphy. She is, of course, the daughter of a billionaire family, own all sorts of companies all over the world.
She's really gorgeous, isn't she?
She's beautiful. She is lovely. And I don't know, I'm torn, Tom Howard. I don't know about you, but I think it's a bit odd to have your wife introduce you on stage. If I was the Prime Minister's wife, I'd find that a bit icky.
I'm not sure. I think it's quite American. actually. If you look across to what happens in the United States, everyone knows Michelle Obama is such a big figure. Of course, Jill Biden, and
she's more impressive than the president.
Well, quite. But also even candidates. Casey DeSantis is a massive asset to Ron DeSantis and his campaign. It seems there's a much more formal role for the political wife, or indeed political husband, in the United States. But of course, Boris Johnson, when he was Prime Minister, sort of started to see perhaps a First Lady role appear.
Have we ever had a female Prime Minister introduced on stage by her husband?
Never.
It would be odd, wouldn't it? So we have to ask ourselves why. Would Dennis
Thatcher be too busy in the bar with his gin and tonic?
And Theresa May's husband?
Tell it. Oh.
You see, there's something, I think it's a little bit, I don't know, I think it's a bit old-fashioned.
Do you think it's old-fashioned?
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a bit strange. But
doesn't it? It's sort of, it's all kind of deferring and clapping. They don't look like equals. There's something about not being like equals.
I think
we're reading too much into
it. But I think, Tom, there's more significant. I think they're trying to neutralise the fact he's the richest Prime Minister we've ever had because he's married to a woman who's the daughter of a billionaire. So present her as an ordinary woman. She looks lovely. She dresses lovely. She speaks in an ordinary way. That's what they're trying to do.
She's been out and about a bit more in the last couple of months, whereas the first 10 months of Rishi Sunak's premiership, we didn't see her at all.
No.
And that, I think, perhaps might be making this sense of her as someone who's a bit aloof or aside or unknown. Perhaps that leads into the sense of otherness, of wealthy and out of touch and all the rest of it. It seems like there is a concerted strategy now to introduce Mrs. Murphy to the British public. She's been out and about in this conference. She did a walkabout on the first day, looking at all the stands. She was followed by press. It seems like she's becoming more of a figure, and potentially this introduction is part of that introduction of herself.
She was all right with the press, because I saw her in the gag with her, and she chatted away quite easily and animated. And I can remember when William Hague was Tory leader, following his wife, what was his wife called? Fion. My job was, I was on the Times and was to get her to tell me what was her favourite Womble. The reason this is, it's
favourite Womble?
Because Mike Batt, who was creator of Wombles, had written the Tory theme music. So I couldn't even get Mrs. Hague to tell me what her favourite one was because she was so terrified of having an opinion. And of course, I monstered her in the paper, and she got monstered then for days because people just thought, what is the point of a political wife if she doesn't say anything, if she just looks pretty? So at least here, she's going to be active.
We're seeing Rishi Sunak 2.0 at this conference.
Very much
John
so.
is the man who was cautious and retiring and steady, and now we're seeing this new sort of revved up, I think he'd like us to think, much more battling change candidate. Perhaps part of that is introducing his family to us in a new way.
It's humanising him because, of course, what he often gets criticised for is being a little robotic and not necessarily talking from the heart. And so they're going to portray him, I guess, as a family man, which he is.
And we're going to hear a bit more about his personal history as well in this speech, we're told.
His dad being a GP, mum being a pharmacist.
Of course, we've heard a lot about his family pharmacist.
We're going to hear a lot more about it.
But I think we're going to hear a bit more about the person of Rishi Sunak, what drives him as an individual. Because I think one of the big things clearly that he's been trying to say, and he was saying it to Chris Hope in his interview yesterday on GB News, was that he wants to be able to change things. He's got a vision for the United Kingdom, and for a long time people have said the Tory party and the Labour Party, they're basically just the same managerial. What's the difference? What's the change? I think Rishi Sunak sees this as an opportunity to set out something different. The question is, will people buy it? And at the same time as he's trying to present himself as this radical Thatcherite figure, changing in a pro-market direction, we hear rumours that there are going to be more banning things coming about in this speech. One of the big rabbits could be an incremental ban on smoking, and that's exactly the same playbook as Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, where they passed a ban that rises by each year. So a 17-year-old now can't buy cigarettes. The idea would be that when they then turn 18, they still couldn't, 19, 20, 21, and as each year goes forward, the level at which the age at which you can buy cigarettes rises. That's a policy that apparently apparently number 10 has been polling, and they find is quite popular.
Apparently.
And so this could be a significant point in the speech. Also, this much touted, much fabled ban on disposable vaping, quite possibly that will be announced in this speech as well, which will be seen as a bit of a populist move.
Lots of applause now because Penny Mordaunt, who's the leader of the Commons, she's just got on the stage. Now, she's a very good public speaker, and she will make them laugh. She will tell lots of jokes. Look at the applause she's getting because she was very popular with the activists and could potentially be the next Tory leader. I don't think she will because she's got a problem about the trans issue. She refers to pregnant people, not pregnant women.
Yeah, very much so. Go on, Tom. You were going to say something.
Well, I think we should just listen into what Penny has to say.
We'll have a listen. This is Penny Mordaunt.
See you all. Bye-bye. For all that you do, all that you believe in, and for being here today. And it's important that you are, because this is the turning point. It is the point from which we are going to be measured. Now, physically getting here has not been straightforward. Mick Whelan will be very disappointed to see so many of you here. Absolutely. But we are quite used to people trying to disrupt our conference. Whether you're a new member, and this is your first conference, or you have been a stalwart of the party for decades, you have all had to stand up to bullies. You've had your offices graffitied, you've been trolled online, you've been called scum, you've had physical threats, some of you have had death threats, and I know that some of you in this hall today have faced sanctions and threats from hostile states. No matter what the attack, we don't back down. 39 years ago, this conference met in the aftermath of the Brighton bomb. Standing up to bullies is what we do. So I know that you are a tough bunch. And that strength comes from a deep motivation to serve and respect for the rights of the individual. And I am glad of that courage, because what I have to say to you today is not for the faint-hearted. Conference, we face the fight of our lives. And our country needs us again to stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Against the odds, against the polling, against the sneering commentary, against the inevitability of decliners and the despite Brexiters. Stand up and fight against the sanctimonious claptrap of a Labour Party who have forgotten their MRSA-infected hospitals, their soaring council tax and fuel duty, mass youth unemployment, and the economic mess they left us to sort out. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight, because when we do, all is possible. Now, later on, you're going to be hearing from our brilliant Prime Minister. And he is going to be talking about the future, about the long term, and how politics needs to change for a brighter future. But for the time I have with you, I want you to cast your minds back. Now, as you know, I'm a Portsmouth girl, and on the South Coast, we know a thing or two about fighting. Over the years, we have been in one scrap after another, and my city still bears the scars to this day. Many of you in this hall will remember the 1980s. I know what you're thinking. Mordaunt couldn't remember the 1980s. She's far too young. Conference, I have to tell you, I was there. And one of my first memories was standing on the hot walls in Portsmouth and I was watching HMS Hermes take the Falklands Task Force out of the harbour. And I stood proud that day. I knew, watching those men and those ships, that my country stood up to bullies. Those men and those families knew that some would not be coming back. It was deeply moving. And it moves me still to think of it. You see, it was the moment I realized courage is infectious. You see, that is what the Conservative Party is for. That is what this nation is for. We stand up and fight. We are the party and country that stood up and fought Nazis and fascists. We are the party and country whose resolve enabled superpowers to end a Cold War. We are the party and country that sent my classmates' fathers and ships from my dockyard to stand up and fight for the rights of the Falkland Islanders to self-determination. All against the prevailing wisdom that it could not and should not be done. We are the party and country that have stood from the start with Ukraine. We are the party and country that stood up for democracy, who gave our countrymen the choice to join a European trading bloc, and 40 years later, the choice to leave what it had become. We are the party and country that transformed the sick man of Europe into a titan on the global stage, who stood up and fought against militant trade unions and broke their chokehold on Britain. A few brave people with courage and conviction and love of country who thought about the long term, not short-term popularity, who knew what needed to be done and took on the bullies to achieve it. Margaret Thatcher and every single person that stood with her and fought for a better future. Now, conference, I happen to know that Lord Tebbit is tuned in to our proceedings from home. We remember you today, and we thank you. All of you still inspire. Never forget those who went before us. And remember that without a Churchill, you can't have a Zelensky. Conference, I am telling you all of this because I want you to remember that our greatest moments as a party and a country come from when we feel at our lowest ebb. And we face such a moment now. Unprecedented threats yield unprecedented opportunity. Unprecedented fears provide unprecedented challenge. So why have I taken you all back to the 1980s? Very simply, conference, because that is where the Labour Party now wishes to return. Make no mistake, they want to fight the battles of the past. All that we have worked so hard to achieve is in peril. The freedom to use our roads without protesters or politicians stopping you. The freedom to access public services and public transport. The freedom to build a business and create wealth. The freedom to invest in your children. The freedom to make of ourselves everything our talents and determination allow. The freedom to speak one's mind. The freedom of political association. The freedom to take personal responsibility, all at risk. Make no mistake, what will happen if we fail to win a general election? And the biggest threat of all is that the sons and daughters of Scargill are readying for a rematch of the battle of the 1980s, no less than the repeal of all the reforms and freedoms we have brought in, aided and abetted by Labour, fuelled by the politics of envy, identity and class hatred, outdated, dogmatic, irrelevant to the needs of the people. We've seen this before. We have seen this before. The Labour-controlled City of Birmingham Council, following the Labour-controlled Liverpool City Council into scuttling around, handing out redundancy notices to its own workers in the wake of bankruptcy. We have seen this movie before. They want to return us to the 1980s. Conference, we are not for returning. No. We must never again let this country to be subject to the bully boy barons of militant trade unions, the Matt Racks, the Mick Lynches, people who say they are going to defend your community while destroying it. People who say to hard-working families, the best way they can make ends meet is to drive those ends further apart by going on strike. People who tell you your cancelled operation on your National Health Service that you fund is a price worth paying for them to meet their agenda. People who want to turn the BMA into the NUM. Conference, we have seen this all before. We must never again let this country be tortured by the rack and the lynch mob. They are the iron fist, the iron fist. So now, let me tell you about the velvet glove. The smooth, silky, red velvet glove that would give them cover. You see, Conference, I don't know about you, but I do not trust the leadership of Keir Starmer to be able to stand up to the iron fist. Why? Because he is not even capable of standing up to Mark Drakeford and his plans for an independent Wales. No. 20-mile-an-hour independent Wales. Or Sadiq Khan and his taxes on the working poor. Or Angela Rayner and her trade union charter. He is incapable of standing up and fighting. He doesn't believe in anything. He doesn't stand for anything. Who is he? A few years ago, he wanted you all to think he was Jeremy Corbyn. He sat in his shadow cabinet knowing full well what that would mean if that man ever got into Downing Street, what it would mean for our defences. He watched while colleagues of Jewish heritage were driven from his party. And at the turn of this year, he wanted you all to think he was Neil Kinnock. He used the exact language that Kinnock used in that fantastic conference speech he made when he took on the hard left of Hatton and Heffer. And at that moment, we Conservatives, we cheered. We cheered Kinnock because we recognised his courage. We recognised his motivation because it was ours too. It didn't matter that he was our opponent. He was fighting for our country. When has Sir Keir ever done that? No. Starmer has emboldened militant trade unionism and voted against protecting the public access to the services they pay for. And now, in Act 3, he wants you all to believe he's Tony Blair. Starmer will do anything and say anything to win an election. And that is where his ambition ends, along with the power that he will cede to his union paymasters and an NEC, which needs a focus group to tell it to sing the national anthem. He will not stand up and fight for anything or anyone. He won't stand up for you. More likely, he's going to lie down. Lie down in the street with Just Stop Oil. Lie down with the Lib Dems and the SNP. Lie down with Ed Davey, the man that makes Tim Farron look like a giant. Yeah. Lie down with Humza Yousaf, the man that made Nicola Sturgeon look competent. But just think for a moment what that would mean for our relationship with the EU and for the union of our precious United Kingdom. Right at the point when our brilliant nation should be focused on the new opportunities ahead, when it should be thinking about the future, taking the long-term decisions to guarantee its success. Be in no doubt what is at stake. These people will erase everything we have achieved. They will deny Britain all it can be. So if you remember nothing else from what I have said today, remember this. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight for our families, for workers, for the protectors, for the wealth creators. Stand up for those that take responsibility. Stand up and fight for all those people that voted to leave the EU and those that voted to remain and accepted the result and wish our country well. Stand up and fight for your communities, for Scotland, for Wales, for Northern Ireland, for England. Stand up and fight for the freedoms we have won. Against socialism, whether it is made of velvet or iron. Have courage and conviction, because when you do, you move our countrymen, our communities and capital of all kinds to our cause. Stand up and fight, because when you stand up and fight, the person beside you stands up and fights. And when our party stands up and fights, the nation stands up and fights. And when our nation stands up and fights, other nations stand up and fight. And they stand up and fight for the things upon which the entire progress of humanity depends. Freedom. That is what conservatives do. That is what this nation does. Have courage. Bring hope. Stand up and fight. Stand up and fight. Thank you, conference.
That was Penny Mordaunt, the Leader of the Commons. Great tub-thumping performance. Tom, you and I have seen her in the Commons. She's very good at the dispatch box, isn't she? She's very quick on her feet. That was a very, really cheered up the activists just before Rishi Sunak.
This is what Penny Mordaunt does. She's in the perfect job for it. Her job is to stand up at that dispatch box and really deliver great entertainment for the chamber. When she was standing to be Prime Minister and came third, of course, amongst Conservative MPs, one of her big slogans was make PMQs fun again. She's seen as one of these people who really can speak and rouse and galvanise, and of course she lent into so many themes that we know Penny Mordaunt for. She's a Portsmouth girl, she is a naval reservist. We heard so much about the 1980s, the Falklands, we heard about standing up and fighting, and all of those themes were so profound there in that speech. Although, of course, there are some criticisms of Penny Mordaunt as well. People have criticised her for perhaps not being entirely on top of her brief. We're now seeing Johnny Mercer there, the Veterans Minister, standing up at the podium in the room.
I wonder why he's on the platform. So is that because he's dashing and good-looking, a former model?
It's interesting.
Do you think that's anything to do with it?
Of course. Leader of the Commons and Veterans Minister aren't the most senior positions in Cabinet. They've been left to today. Some of the larger, great officers of state, of course, had speeches on previous days.
But it's funny what you were saying then, Tom, about the fact that Penny Mordaunt draws upon this sort of military aura that seems to surround her. When she spoke, what was the speech? I think it was when she was trying to be PM. Do you remember she had the backdrop?
Yes, the naval, the chart backdrop.
Right.
She said that she again, with no notes, with a learnt speech, delivered her pitch to be party leader that really accelerated her chances there, and she did much better than people thought.
Now
that
we've
she
got the
might.
veterans, but now I'm thinking, now we've got Johnny Mercer as veterans. There is a kind of military, slightly sort of protective air about this, isn't it? It's letting us think we are in charge. We'll keep you safe.
And that's always been what the Conservatives have lent into. People, of course, see Margaret Thatcher as a war leader, but perhaps we should listen
let's have a little
to
listen to what Johnny's saying.
And I want us to really focus on what lies ahead. Because out there's a country that is yearning to be won over, that really does not want to vote and have a Labour government. They want to change. They want a change that works better for them. Everyone wants change after 13 years. Just ask my wife. Because life's really difficult out there at the moment, right? It's really tough in cities like mine. And look, we've done a lot to support the people, right? You can't argue with it. Paying half of the average household bill, freezing fuel duty, benefits rising in line with inflation to look after our poorest people through the storms. But for too many people, it doesn't feel like that. And we haven't got it always right. And we all know that. Okay? But change is afoot. And I would not be here today if that was not happening. You feel the change. You can feel the change this week. Long-term decisions for a brighter future actually mean something. Right? Take my crusade on Veterans Affairs. I joined this party because, like many ordinary Britons today, I saw it as the party of the nation. Moderate, patriotic, committed, and values-driven. I believed that if I could show the values that were missing in the care of my generation of veterans of Afghanistan, this party would close that gap. Because it was a values thing. It was a values thing. How we look after those who serve. Those who, instead of shouting loudest about their country outside yet another party conference, those who actually crossed that threshold and were prepared to sacrifice body and mind for our way of life, for our country, for our values. And in the last 30 years, we have seen politicians repeatedly failing to take the long-term choices for our veterans. But this PM has been different from the start. And I would not be here if he wasn't. He made a conscious decision straight away that we were going to follow in the footsteps of our American, Australian, Canadian and other peer nation allies and change our structure of government to better look after our veterans. He decided that he would have a veterans minister in his cabinet for the first time, that he would constitute the Office for Veterans Affairs properly, and that we would finally close that gap between what we say about our veterans, including from this very conference stage, and how it feels to be a veteran in the United Kingdom today, because the truth is the veterans' care in the United Kingdom has been transformed. Single dedicated pathways for physical and mental health care in our NHS, backed up by millions of pounds of long-term funding. Specific programmes reaching vulnerable veterans in the criminal justice system to a compassionate but really aggressive approach to ending the stain of veterans' homelessness in the United Kingdom this year. Many governments around the world have tried that. Many have tried that. But we are actually going to end rough sleeping because of a lack of provision in our veterans by this Christmas under a Conservative government. And finally, that totemic scourge on the lives of our extraordinary people who served in Northern Ireland has been removed. The hounding of these special people who stood against terror and violence in Northern Ireland on our behalf was appalling. It was a stain on our nation. Not just on the veterans community, but the nation as a whole. The sight of these men being arrested in their 80s, dragged back to Belfast, hounded literally to death. It was a totemic symptom of a nation's moral ambivalence to those who served. To end that was about hard choices, right? It was about principles. It was about honesty, about what could be achieved in that space. It talked about who we are as a party, who the Prime Minister is as a man, his character, what he believes in. It was about values. And with the Northern Ireland Legacy Act, we have now achieved that change. I pay tribute to Chris at the Northern Ireland office, of course. But mostly, I pay tribute to the unstinting bravery, patriotism and courage of that generation of veterans who served in Northern Ireland. I know you have not always felt it, but your sacrifices brought the peace that we have today in the United Kingdom, and we are unequivocal in our admiration and total respect for your service, and I hope you can begin to feel that now for yourselves as well. I stand before you as perhaps the one-time fiercest critic in this space, but acknowledging we have further to go, I can honestly tell you that veterans' care in the United Kingdom has never been better because of a Conservative government. Okay, these are the things a Conservative government can do. Long-term decisions for a brighter future. Labour don't even have a veterans minister in their shadow cabinet. They've already said they'll repeal the Northern Ireland bill I've just been talking about. They have no plans for an Office for Veterans Affairs, because to do this stuff, you actually have to believe in something, right? And if we know anything at all, it's that Keir Starmer believes in nothing at all, right? He will bend to the highest bidder. First bit of rough water, he's going to bail out, okay? And contrast this with Rishi. Voting for Brexit, despite being told it was end of his career. Creating a world-leading furlough scheme throughout the pandemic. Taking a leadership role in our approach to net zero with working families at the heart of it. Because he's in it to serve. I know him. I know that central in his mind are the working families of this nation, who drive this nation, who serve in the armed forces, who drive the economy, and frankly deserve better than they've had from Westminster. And the British people deserve that. They deserve that leadership. We must not consign them to years of a feeble Labour government they don't want and doesn't believe in anything at all. We must hang together in the months ahead. This is the vital piece. We must hang together. Now is the time for focus, a focus on our nation, on the mission above ourselves. If we do that, I'm convinced we can get there. Let's get to it.
What is change? Change is saving 12 million jobs at the height of a global pandemic.
Today, I can announce that for the first time in our history, the government is going to step in and help to pay people's wages.
Change is fixing the Northern Ireland Protocol after years of arguments.
Rishi Sunak hailed a decisive breakthrough on Great Britain's trade arrangements with Northern Ireland.
Change is challenging the status quo.
Well, we're expecting his wife. So they're getting a video now showing Rishi's greatest hits. Do you think that'd be quite a short video, wouldn't you? His greatest hits, but they're talking about the boats, they're talking about various things he's done. Snazzy music's going with it, he's with police officers. This is classic, isn't it, Tom?
Referring a lot to his time during COVID, and Tories see this as when he was the most popular politician in the country. He was giving everyone free money now. Of course, we're seeing some of the consequences of printing all of that money, as we've seen over the last year or so. But they do refer consistently to this, and Rishi Sunak, in his interviews this week, he said it to our very own Chris Hope yesterday on GB News. You saw me as Chancellor.
Now, here we are, Tom. This
again.
is his wife coming on stage. Now, this is unprecedented for a Tory Prime Minister's partner to introduce them on stage. Here she is, looking fabulous. This is Akshata Murthy, the daughter of a billionaire, one of India's richest men. She's going to speak, and I've never heard her voice on a microphone. Let's have a listen.
Good morning. And thank you. Okay. Well, I just got away with good morning. We're almost at good afternoon. But yes, you're absolutely right. I'm not on the agenda for today. A bit of a surprise addition, shall we say. And a surprise for my husband, too, who has no idea what I'm going to say. When I told our lovely girls, Krishna and Anushka, about being here today, they were also quite surprised. But look, the reason why I'm here is really quite simple. And it's because Rishi and I are each other's best friends. We're one team. And I could not imagine being anywhere else but here today with all of you to show my support to him and to the party. Now, as you'd expect, there's been a lot about Rishi in the media, about who he is, what he likes, what he doesn't like, what motivates him, and so forth. Now, some of it is accurate. I'm afraid he does love a good rom-com. The cheesier, the better, even. And some of it is not so true. So you'll be relieved to hear that episodes of Emily in Paris are not informing his outlook on the EU. But in all seriousness, though, as we gather here today to look to the future of the UK, I'm so grateful to have this chance to talk to all of you about the man who is leading us there. Now, let me start with one word that sums up my husband, and that is aspiration. Aspiration runs through his DNA like it does this party's. Aspiration is what drove his family many years ago to move to the UK. And aspiration is what drives Rishi to build for a better country and a better life for all our young people to look forward to. Rishi and I met when we were 24, when we were both studying abroad in America. Right from the very beginning, I was struck by two things about him. No, not his smart suits or his love for hoodies. He actually didn't own either back then. But two much more important things. His deep love for his home, the United Kingdom, and his sincere desire to ensure as many people as possible have a chance to have the opportunities he was lucky enough to have had. It completely energized him. At the time, I wondered if this passion was just youthful optimism. Today, I'm not sure youthful optimism is a term you can still use about a man in his 40s. But Rishi's energy and passion for the future of this country are as strong as ever. That is why he has been a lifelong Conservative. That is why he entered politics almost a decade ago. And that is why it is the greatest honour imaginable for him to be Prime Minister, leading the country and the party he loves. As I said earlier, getting together with Rishi almost 20 years ago was not the easy route. It meant, in our early days together, a complicated, long-distance relationship. But let me tell you, on the other hand, being with Rishi was the easiest decision of my life. He's fun, he's thoughtful, he's compassionate, and he has an incredible zest for life. But what drew me to him most was his strength of character, his honesty, his integrity, with a firm understanding of right from wrong. It's what I'm still drawn to even today, after 14 years of being married. As you may know, Rishi is the son of a GP and a pharmacist. His parents moved to the UK from East Africa with very little, but they built here a life for themselves and for their children. For Rishi's dad, being involved in his patients' lives beyond the doctor's surgery was a big part of how he saw his role. Rishi's mum trained as a pharmacist, and years later, after saving enough to open her own shop, she too went above and beyond the call of duty to build deep-rooted relationships with her customers. It meant Rishi and his younger brother and sister grew up in a household entrenched in their community in Southampton, and they were wholly devoted to it. That love of community grew in Rishi too, from a very young age, as the most natural extension of how he sees home. And that connection with people is the source of his political life. Rishi cares deeply about this party and the values that underpin it. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all for the support you've already shown him and for the warm welcome you've given our young family. Please know that Rishi is working hard to do the right thing for the country, not just for now, but for the long term, with honesty and with integrity. That is why he has told some hard truths already, and knowing him, he'll continue to do so. He shares your values, and he knows how much you care about the future of the UK, but also about the struggles and the challenges that people are facing today, and the potential we all see in a better tomorrow, not just for a few, but for everyone in our country. Just as with our girls, he wants the next generation to grow up in a country that offers them opportunity and hope, a country that helps them build rock-solid foundations, with a deep respect for hard work and the confidence to fulfill their potential, and a love for community in all its forms. Sometimes, when the going gets tough, I remind Rishi that he's fighting for his values, that he's fighting for this party's values, knowing that it's a hard road ahead, but success is hard won. Rishi, you know this. You know that doing the right thing for the long term, even when it's hard, is the right thing to do. And I hope you also know how proud you make our girls and me every single day. conference, thank you for letting me gate crash to tell you a little bit more about the Rishi that I know and the Rishi that I hope most people will come to understand. Now, it gives me the greatest pleasure to introduce you to a wonderful, wonderful father, my best friend, and your Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak.
Thank you. Conference, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Akshata, for that introduction, and thank you for always being there for me, my wife. Truly the best long-term decision for a brighter future I ever made. I've been blessed in my life. I have a wonderful wife and 2 daughters who make me proud every single day. And I was also lucky enough to grow up in the most loving of homes. My dad was a GP and my mum a pharmacist. You did need a smaller mention of the last summer, I know. Now, in so many ways, I wouldn't be standing here before you today without them. My mum and dad were and are my inspiration. Thank you, Mum. Thank you, Dad. Like so many of us in this hall, they understood the importance of community and made sure that I did too. They didn't believe community was some extension of government. Rather, they understood community is sustained by individuals, by those who look out for their neighbour, treat others as they would like to be treated. They understood the fundamental importance of service. It was seeing the difference they made to people's lives that made me want to go into politics. Now, my mother set up her own pharmacy. It was a proper family business. We all chipped in. As a teenager, I helped deliver prescriptions and do the books. I learnt there the importance of being able to meet your commitments and make good on your promises. And my parents are long retired now, but the Sunak pharmacy left me with a lasting respect for every small family business. This Conservative Party, the party of the grocer's daughter and the pharmacist's son, will always be the party of enterprise, the party of small business. I've been Prime Minister for almost a year now, and we have done good things in that time. We've made progress on our 5 priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists, and to stop the boats. But today, I want to share with you my reflections on what I have seen and what I have learned doing this job. I have seen up close the quality of our armed forces and our intelligence services, truly the finest in the world. The debt of gratitude we owe them is why we are making this the best place to be a veteran. And I know we will deliver, because we have a Minister for Veteran Affairs sitting in Cabinet. Johnny served in Afghanistan. This is personal for him. He stood with his fellow soldiers in battle, and now he is ensuring that it is this Conservative government making our country fit for our heroes. We've backed our military with record investment. Working with Ben, a great defence secretary, we put the defence budget on a sustainable footing. And now Grant will ensure that our advanced AUKUS submarine alliance with Australia and the United States keeps the world safe for decades to come and creates jobs here at home. And through our leading role in NATO, we remain the bulwark of European security. All testament to this country's global reach and influence and our determination to take long-term decisions in the national interest. By contrast, just remember that not once, but twice, Labour tried to make a man Prime Minister who didn't believe in NATO, who would have surrendered our nuclear deterrent, and who blames Britain for every problem. Sir Keir Starmer might want us to forget about his repeated support for Jeremy Corbyn, but we never will. You can never trust Labour with our country's security. I'm proud to say we've also led the world in providing support to Ukraine. We were the first country to send Western battle tanks to Kyiv. Now more than 10 others have followed. We were the first country to send long-range weapons to Kyiv. Now France and the United States have followed. We were the first country to agree to train Ukrainian pilots. Now more than a dozen others have followed. I say this to our allies. If we give President Zelensky the tools, the Ukrainians will finish the job. Slava Ukraini! Doing this job, I meet and talk to inspirational men and women across our country. You see that our most potent strength, our most powerful resource, our greatest hope is our people. But what I've learned is that there is an undeniable sense that politics just doesn't work the way it should. The feeling that Westminster is a broken system, and the same goes for Holyrood, Cardiff Bay and Stormont. It isn't anger. It's an exhaustion with politics. In particular, politicians saying things and then nothing ever changing. And you know what? People are right. Politics doesn't work the way it should. We've had 30 years of a political system which incentivizes the easy decision, not the right one. 30 years of vested interests standing in the way of change. 30 years of rhetorical ambition which achieves little more than a short-term headline. And why? Because our political system is too focused on short-term advantage, not long-term success. Politicians spent more time campaigning for change than actually delivering it. It doesn't have to be this way. I won't be this way. Conference, our mission is to fundamentally change our country. Now, the Labour Party have set out their stall to do and say as little as possible and hopes no one notices. They want to take people's votes for granted and keep doing politics the same old way. It's a bet on people's apathy. It doesn't speak to any higher purpose or brighter future. It is about power for the sake of power. It is, in short, everything that is wrong with our politics. So if this country is to change, then it can only be us who will deliver it. Because if we do not, our growth will be stunted. More places will be left behind, and ever more of our time will be spent debating the side issues and symptoms rather than the deeper, more structural challenges we face. We won't allow this to happen. So where a consensus is false, we will challenge it. Where a vested interest is placing itself above the needs of the people, we will stop it. And where common sense is under attack from an organised assault, we will defend it. Today, I will set out how we will achieve this, beginning with a set of long-term decisions to build a brighter future for our children and to fundamentally change our country. And conference, you can already see my approach in the course I charted on net zero. And we Conservatives love our natural world. We are determined to be good stewards of it. In my own constituency, it is the beauty of the North York Moors and Swaledale and Wensleydale that makes the place home. We Conservatives also value frankness and consent. We believe that politicians have a duty to treat household budgets with respect and that change only endures if we bring people with us. As you could tell by the reaction to my decision to chart a new course to net zero, it was not the easiest argument to have. But when I looked at the reality of what people were being asked to do, the thousands of pounds people would need to pay, all of that disproportionately falling on the poorest in society, by the way, and all of it not actually necessary in those time frames to meet our net zero targets, and in spite of us doing more than any other country, I concluded it simply wasn't right. So I decided to take a pragmatic, proportionate, and realistic approach to reaching net zero. And I won't take any lectures from other countries that have done far less than us, or from those for whom spending thousands of pounds means nothing. Change is difficult, particularly for those who disagree. But remember this, we will still meet our international obligations. We will still meet our domestic targets, and we will still get to net zero by 2050. We have solved a problem and offered an unapologetic defence of good Conservative common sense. So as much to the country, I make this promise to all of you in this hall. As I did last summer, I will tell it as it is. I will lead in a different way, because that is the only way to create the sort of change in our politics and in our country that we all desperately want to see. Now, I came into office in difficult circumstances, and I don't want to waste time debating the past, because what matters is the future. The facts are the facts. You can't borrow your way out of inflation. And if we want fundamental change in our country, we need a strong economy as a foundation. That is why halving inflation was the first and most important of the 5 priorities I set out at the start of the year. Everything we want to achieve requires getting inflation under control. Inflation is the biggest destroyer of all, of industry, of jobs, of savings, and of society. No policy which puts at risk the defeat of inflation, no matter its short-term attraction, can be right. Not my words, but those of Margaret Thatcher, as true now as they were then. I know you want tax cuts. I want them too, and we will deliver them. But the best tax cut we can give people right now is to halve inflation and ease the cost of living. And with inflation under control, our debt reduction will become easier. And as debt falls, confidence grows. And as confidence grows, so too will our economy. We need our economy to grow faster and for people across the country to feel the benefits of that. Like other Western economies, we haven't grown quickly enough in recent years. But don't let Labour and the others talk down our nation. We now know that we have had one of the fastest recoveries from the pandemic of any major economy in Europe. Since leaving the single market, we've grown faster than France and Germany, not despite Brexit, because of Brexit. We have the largest life sciences, financial services, creative and tech sectors in all of Europe, and we have near record numbers of people with the security that a job provides. And if we want to keep growing, we have to create the conditions in which businesses can drive growth, and that's exactly what we're doing. We still have the lowest corporation tax rate in the G7, and thanks to the Chancellor's business tax cuts, we are the best place to invest in the machinery and equipment that your business needs to grow. Innovation drives growth in a modern economy, so we also have the most generous tax regime for research and development in the G7. And our Brexit freedoms make us ever more competitive. From financial services to clinical trials to agriculture, we are creating a more agile regulatory system, freeing up businesses to drive the growth our country needs. The fact we control our own trade policy now is why we can be the first European country to join the £11 trillion Pacific Trade Pact, linking us to the fastest growing region in the world and opening up new markets for our farmers and great British products. We have new free ports, from the Firth of Forth to the Solent, ensuring the benefits of trade and investment are spread across our country. And thank you, Kemi, for cutting away Brussels red tape and saving small businesses £1 billion a year. Brexit was more than a vote to leave the EU. It was a vote to change, to become something more. It was a statement of our belief that Britain could begin a new story, one which reached all parts of our country and everyone in it. We must keep making the case for taking back control, because if we don't, our opponents will try and neuter this change, to align us with the European Union so that we never seize the full opportunities of Brexit. Now, we know where Keir Starmer's heart lies on this issue, and we know he can't be trusted on it either. First, he said he'd respect the referendum result. Then, he wanted a second referendum. Then, he wanted free movement. Then, he didn't. He said he wouldn't try and renegotiate our deal. Then, he said he would. And then just 2 weeks ago, he was caught on camera telling a meeting of international politicians that he now just wants to follow all the EU rules. The irony isn't lost on me. While we're busy thinking about the future of the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer's just banging on about Europe. You just cannot know what you're going to get with him. The only thing that is certain is that it won't be what he's promising you. But the worst thing about Sir Keir is that he just says whatever he thinks will benefit him the most. Doesn't matter whether he can deliver it. Doesn't matter if it's true. It doesn't matter if he said the opposite just a few weeks or months ago. He is the walking definition of the 30-year political status quo I am here to end. That is why we have to beat him, and conference, that is why we will. Now, if we are to create change and drive growth across our country, then we must get our infrastructure right. A false consensus has taken root that all that matters are links between our big conurbations. This consensus said that our national economic regeneration should be driven by cities at the exclusion of everywhere else. It said that the most important connections those cities could have was to London and not anywhere else. And it said that the only links that mattered were north to south, not east to west. What we really need, though, is better transport connections in the north. A new network north that will join up our great towns and cities in the North and Midlands. I wanted to come here to Manchester today to say that this will be our priority. our focus, our project. HS2 is the ultimate example of the old consensus. The result is a project whose costs have more than doubled, which has been repeatedly delayed, and it is not scheduled to reach here in Manchester for almost 2 decades, and for which the economic case has massively been weakened with the changes to business travel post-COVID. I say to those who backed the project in the first place, the facts have changed. And the right thing to do when the facts change is to have the courage to change direction. And so, I am ending this long-running saga. I am cancelling the rest of the HS2 project. And in its place, we will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation. As a result of the decision we are taking today, every region outside of London will receive the same or more government investment than they would have done under HS2, with quicker results. No government has ever developed a more ambitious scheme for northern transport than our new Network North. This is the right way to drive growth and spread opportunity across our country, to level up. With our new Network North, you will be able to get from Manchester to the new station in Bradford in 30 minutes, Sheffield in 42 minutes, and to Hull in 84 minutes on a fully electrified line. Don't worry, there's more. We'll protect the £12 billion to link up Manchester and Liverpool as planned, and we'll engage with local leaders on how best to deliver that scheme. We'll build the Midlands Rail Hub, connecting 50 different stations. We'll help Andy Street extend the West Midlands Metro. We'll build the Leeds Tram. We'll electrify the North Wales Main Line, upgrade the A1, the A2, the A5, the M6. We'll connect... There is more. There's lots more. We'll connect our union with the A75, boosting links between Scotland and Northern Ireland. We will fund the Shipley Bypass, the Blythe Relief Road, and deliver 70 other road schemes. We will resurface roads across the country. We'll bring back the Don Valley Line. We will upgrade the Energy Coastline between Carlisle, Workington and Barrow. Build hundreds of other schemes, and keep the £2 bus fare across the whole country. I challenge anyone to tell me with a straight face that all of that isn't what the North really needs. Our plan will drive far more growth and opportunity here in the North than a faster train to London ever would. As John Stevenson and Ben Houchen have long argued, East-West links are more important than North-South ones. Now, given how far along construction is, we will complete the line from Birmingham to Euston. And yes, HS2 trains will still run here to Manchester, and journey times will be cut between Manchester, Birmingham and London by 30 minutes. And I say this to Andy Street, a man I have huge admiration and respect for. I know we have different views on HS2, but I also know we can work together to ensure a faster, stronger spine, quicker trains and more capacity between Birmingham and Manchester. The management of HS2 will no longer be responsible for the Euston site. There must be some accountability for the mistakes made, for the mismanagement of this project. We will instead create a new Euston development zone, building thousands of new homes for the next generation of homeowners, new business opportunities, and a station that delivers the capacity we need. And in doing so, for the first time in the life cycle of this project, we will have cut costs. The £6.5 billion of savings that Mark and I are making will be taken from the Euston site and given to the rest of the country. Now, the decision I have made and the stance I am taking will be attacked. They will say that halting it signals a lack of ambition. There will be people I respect, people in our own party, who will oppose it. But there is nothing ambitious about simply pouring more and more money into the wrong project. There is nothing long-term about ignoring your real infrastructure needs so that you can spend an ever larger amount on one grand project. They will say that we have already spent so much on it that it would be embarrassing to stop. That, though, would be an absurd reason to continue, an abdication of leadership. They will say that there is somehow a cross-party consensus on the project. As I have already said, that consensus is wrong. For too long, people in Westminster have invested in the transport they want, not the transport the rest of the country, particularly the North and the Midlands, wants and needs. And to those who disagree, who will focus on what I have stopped, I ask you to consider what we have just created with Network North, an alternative which, in place of one delayed and overrunning project, will now begin hundreds upon hundreds of new projects, large and small, road and rail, bus and train, covering the whole country, that will be delivered faster, that will see every region receiving more investment than they would have done. You can't have both. So those who wish to disagree with me, I respect that. But they should have the honesty to admit that they would now be cancelling the hundreds of alternative projects right across the country that people will benefit from instead. Conference, I think our plan is simply a better long-term investment of £36 billion of taxpayers' money. Now, we need to bring this willingness to make the right decision, not the easy one, to every aspect of our national life. The NHS is important to us all. It is the birthright of every person in this country. It was the NHS and social care staff who worked night and day to get us through the pandemic. Now, our commitment to the principle of an NHS free at the point of use is immovable. And this Conservative government is putting record resources into our NHS and social care too. But we Conservatives know that you don't measure your affection for the NHS just by how much money you put in. but how you reform it for the challenges ahead. I know that right now waiting lists are patients' most pressing concern. Just as in Scotland and Wales, they have risen because of the pandemic. And now strikes have led to more than 1 million cancelled appointments. Now, this is a reasonable government. We have negotiated and reached pay deals with over 1 million NHS workers, including nurses and hospital porters. We have met the recommendations of the independent pay review bodies for junior doctors and consultants in full. We have cut their taxes on their pensions as they requested. But they continue to demand massive, unaffordable pay rises, and that they have chosen to walk out this week says it all. This strike is all about politics, not patience. These strikes are not in the spirit of the NHS. This year we celebrate its 75 years of service, and one of my abiding aims as your Prime Minister is to set the NHS up for the next 75. True believers in the promise of the NHS wanted to reflect the world we live in today. That means a higher quality service that offers you, the patient, more choice, allowing you to use any provider, independent or NHS, free of charge if that will get you treated quicker. A common sense reform that this Conservative government has made. Now next, Steve and I want to give the NHS the staff it needs. For decades, we've not trained enough doctors and nurses. The result? The NHS either hiring staff from abroad or paying temporary agency workers huge fees. And we are ending that with the first ever long-term workforce plan for our health service. Let me repeat that. The first ever long-term workforce plan. It says everything about the short-termism of our politics, that for the last 75 years, not a single government has planned for how many doctors and nurses the NHS will need in the decades ahead. Our plan doubles the number of students training to be doctors and nurses, but it is also a reform plan for the NHS, with new ways of training and new roles, new ways of working, all driving up productivity. Now, I know vested interests will oppose some of these measures, but we Conservatives must do the right thing and make the changes that will enable the NHS to work as productively as the best healthcare systems anywhere in the world. And this is what a long-term decision really is. Given it takes up to 15 years to train a consultant, there's no politics in this investment. It's not about credit. It's about our kids and their kids. They'll get a much better and stronger NHS. And that's why we're here. That's why we Conservatives do what we do, up and down the country, from Whitehall to Town Hall. We're building a better future for the next generation. But to ease the more fundamental burden of demand on the NHS, we need more preventative care to stop people having to go to hospital in the first place. We must tackle the single biggest, entirely preventable cause of ill health, disability and death, and that is smoking. In our country, smoking causes 1 in 4 cancer deaths. It kills 64,000 people a year and leads to almost 1 hospital admission every minute. It significantly increases the risks of strokes, heart disease, dementia and stillbirth. Now, we've made great progress in tackling smoking. The number of people smoking is down by 2/3 since the 1970s. But if we are to do the right thing for our kids, we must try and stop teenagers taking up cigarettes in the first place. Because without a significant change, thousands of children will start smoking in the coming years and have their lives cut short as a result. People take up cigarettes when they're young. 4 in 5 smokers have started by the time they're 20. Later, the vast majority try to quit, but many fail because they're addicted and they wish they had never taken up the habit in the first place. Now, if we could break that cycle, if we could stop the start, then we would be on our way to ending the biggest cause of preventable death and disease in our country. So I propose that in future, we raise the smoking age by 1 year every year. That means a 14-year-old today will never legally be sold a cigarette, and that they and their generation can grow up smoke-free. And we know this works. When we raised the smoking age to 18, smoking prevalence dropped by 30% in that age group. When the United States raised the age to 21, the smoking rate dropped by 39% in that age group. Smoking places huge pressures on the NHS and costs our country £17 billion a year. We have a chance to cut cancer deaths by a quarter, significantly ease those pressures and protect our children, and we should take it. This is not a values judgment on people who smoke. I don't believe it would be fair to take away the rights of anyone to smoke who currently does so. And the vote on this in Parliament will be a free vote, as the bar on smoking in public places was, and raising the smoking age to 18 was. There will be no government whip. It is a matter of conscience. And I want you all, and the country, to know where mine is. For a Conservative, measures that restrict choice are never easy. I know not everyone in this hall will agree with me on this, but I've spent a long time weighing up this decision. Simply put, unlike all other legal products, there is no safe level of smoking. And what has ultimately swayed me is that none of us, not even those who smoke, want our children to grow up to be smokers. And this change can make that a reality. It will save more lives than any other decision we could take. And as any parent or teacher knows, one of the most worrying trends right now is the rise in vaping amongst children. 1 in 5 children have used vapes. We must act before it becomes endemic. So we will also bring forward measures to restrict the availability of vapes to our children, looking at flavours, packaging, displays and disposable vapes. Now, as Prime Minister, I have an obligation to do what I think is the right thing for our country in the long term. And as Conservatives, we have never shirked that responsibility. We have always been at the front of society, leading it. And when we have the tools at our disposal to deal with the biggest cause of preventable illness and death in our country, to cut cancer deaths by a quarter, to significantly reduce long-term pressure on our NHS, and to do for our children what we all in our heart of hearts know is right, we must act. We must lead. Conference, we must put the next generation first, and that is what I will do. But all the boldness in the world will only mean so much if we can't similarly deal with matters of fundamental sovereignty, safety, and control. I'm talking, of course, about illegal immigration. It is non-negotiable that you, the British people, decide who comes here and not criminal gangs. Those gangs ply a trade that leads to innocent people dying. We have a moral duty to defeat this evil, and we will. Now, I've never pretended that stopping the boats will be easy. At the time I committed the government to delivering that goal, the consensus was simple. There was nothing we could do about it. They pointed to 4 years of growing crossings and said impossible. Well, conference, they were wrong. It is not impossible, and we are proving it. Small boat crossings are, for the first time since the phenomenon began, down 20% this year. All while entry into Europe is up. We are by no means where we want to be, but don't let anyone tell you we aren't making progress. We are, and we will get there. Our new law will ensure that if you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. Now, I am confident that once flights start going regularly to Rwanda, the boats will stop coming. Just look at how our returns agreement with Albania has seen the numbers coming from there fall by 90%. I am confident that our approach complies with our international obligations. But know this, I will do whatever is necessary to stop the boats. Now, by contrast, Labour's plan is to cook up some deal with the EU, which could see us accepting around 100,000 of Europe's asylum seekers. If your answer to illegal migration is to increase it, you clearly just don't get it, and that is why we have to stop them. And that's because on this and on so many other issues, Labour simply don't share our and the country's values. My values are simple: service, family, work. I was brought up to understand the value of work. Work gives you security. Work gives you purpose. When the pandemic hit, we were faced with the prospect of 12 million people losing that security, that purpose, overnight. And once you're out of work, it can be hard to get back in. I wasn't prepared to cast 12 million people into that darkness. I'm proud that furlough not only prevented this, but helped ensure our economy recovered more strongly from the pandemic than France, Germany, and Japan. Never forget the scale of what we did for so many. In 6 weeks, we did something that had never been done before, from scratch. I was told it wasn't possible, that it wouldn't work, but I got it done. Furlough was compassionate conservatism in action. If furlough was one thing that helped us get through COVID, then Ian Duncan Smith's welfare reforms were another. The old system could not have coped with the pressure in the way that his universal credit did. But we have more to do. We must end the national scandal where our benefit system declares that more than 2 million people of working age are incapable of actually doing any. That's not conservative. That's not compassionate. That must change. In 2011, 1 in 5 of those doing a work capability assessment were deemed unfit to work. But the latest figure now stands at 65%. Are people 3 times sicker today than they were a decade ago? No, of course not. It's not good for our economy. It's not fair on taxpayers who have to pick up the bill. And it's a tragedy for those 2 million people being written off. I refuse to accept this, and that is why we are going to change the rules so that those who can work do work. Your values and your priorities should be expressed in everything the public sector does. Too often, It is not. In too many parts of our permanent state, virtue signalling has replaced common sense. As Suella has said, there is no such thing as a minor crime. If the police tolerate crime and antisocial behaviour in any form, we'll have more crime of all sorts. So that's why we now have record numbers of police officers. And every crime should be investigated. Our streets will be safer, our communities more secure. No one should be afraid to walk home alone at night. And our London mayoral candidate, Susan Hall, is doing a great job of holding Sadiq Khan to account for his failings on policing. Londoners, you will be safer with Susan. And I am clear, there are some crimes so heinous that those who perpetrate them should spend the rest of their lives behind bars. So I can confirm that we will legislate for sexual and sadistic murders to carry a full life term with no prospect of release. We are going to change this country, and that means life means life. Now, that shouldn't be a controversial position. The vast majority of hard-working people agree with it. And it also shouldn't be controversial for parents to know what their children are being taught in school about relationships. Patients should know when hospitals are talking about men or women. And we shouldn't get bullied. And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man is a man and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense. We should also never be afraid to talk about the thing that matters most to most of us: family. Whenever you want to talk about family, someone whispers, "Is that wise, Prime Minister?" You'll be accused of promoting a one-size-fits-all view. But in this Conservative Party, the party that legislated for same-sex marriage and is investing record amounts in childcare, we know that what matters is that love cascades down the generations. It is family that cares for us at the beginning of our life. It is family that helps us learn. It is family that sustains us. And in old age, it is family that lightens the autumn of our days. Family matters. And as proud Conservatives, we should never be afraid to say that. And there's another family that matters to us all, our family of nations: England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Today, our union is the strongest it has been in a quarter of a century. The forces of separatism are in retreat across our country. Nicola Sturgeon wanted to go down in the history books as the woman who broke up our country, but it now looks like she may go down for very different reasons. We are a remarkable combination of four nations with a proud history, and that history should give us enormous confidence in our future. My grandparents didn't emigrate to just Leicester or Southampton, but to the United Kingdom. They came here because our country stands for a set of values. We are the home of fair play, the best of British. We are the place for those who want to add to our national story. The United Kingdom has done a huge amount for my family. I often think about how different our lives would be if my grandparents had not left India and East Africa all those years ago. I owe our country everything. And it is my duty to do what I can to help this country take the right long-term decisions for the years ahead. The United Kingdom is also the most successful multi-ethnic democracy on earth. And our party has led the way on that. We had the first ethnic minority Prime Minister when Queen Victoria was still on the throne. We've had 3 female Prime Ministers, and I stand before you today as the first non-white leader in our country's history. Meanwhile, Labour's last 3 leaders all live within the same square mile of North London. Now, when the Richmond Conservative Association selected me in North Yorkshire, people in other countries couldn't understand it. One American magazine even sent a reporter to Yorkshire to write about how a candidate of the wrong race could cost the Tories one of the safest seats in England. But they should not have projected their own prejudices onto our country. The people of North Yorkshire were not interested in my colour, but my character. Never let anyone tell you that this is a racist country. It is not. My story is a British story. A story about how a family can go from arriving here with little to Downing Street in 3 generations. What does the Conservative Party offer a family of immigrants? The chance to become Energy Secretary, Business Secretary, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, even the chance to become Prime Minister. When I first became an MP, my grandfather came to Parliament to see me. As we stood in Westminster Hall, on that floor which Disraeli and Churchill had walked across so many times, my grandfather suddenly got out his mobile phone and started to make a quick call. I was a new MP and I wasn't quite sure whether phones were allowed there or not. And I said, Nanaji, can't you just wait a moment? And he replied that he was calling the landlady he had when he had first arrived in this country. He said to me, I just wanted to tell her where I was standing. Now, I am proud to be the first British Asian Prime Minister, but you know what? I'm even prouder that it's just not a big deal. And just remember, it was the Conservative Party that made that happen, not the Labour Party. Now, if we want to change the direction of our country and to build a better future, nothing is more important than making our education system the best it can be. When our party came to power in 2010, our schools were slipping down international league tables. Now, they are rapidly rising. Of what we have done in government since 2010, what I am proudest of is our record on education. With Michael and Nick Gibb, we took on a failed ideology. We brought back proper knowledge. We empowered reformers. We gave parents more choice and helped them hold schools to account. But perhaps the most profound thing we have done is to disprove the idea that there is something predestined about who will succeed and who won't. We have state schools in some of the most deprived parts of the country producing some of the best results. These schools, empowered by reform, don't think that there are limits to these children because of the postcode they were born in. Rather, they demand, inspire, and deliver excellence. A Labour government would never have done this. Rather, Labour pursued the false dream of 50% of children going to university and abandoned apprenticeships. This assumption that the only route to success was the university route was one of the great mistakes of the last 30 years. It led to thousands of young people being ripped off by degrees that did nothing to increase their employability or earnings potential. So we are stopping universities from enrolling students on courses that do nothing for their life chances. Under us, no more rip-off degrees. And if you want to know how much I value apprenticeships, look at the fact that in Gillian, we have our first ever apprentice to be Education Secretary. Today, I want to build on these Conservative achievements and take a long-term decision to address the problems with our 16 to 19 education system. Technical education is not given the respect it deserves. Students don't spend enough time in the classroom. A quarter of our children leave education without the basic literacy and numeracy they need to fulfill their potential. And our students study too narrow a range of subjects. Today, I am changing all of that, pulling one of the biggest levers we have to change the direction of our country. We will introduce the new rigorous, knowledge-rich, advanced British standard, which will bring together A-levels and T-levels into a new single qualification for our school leavers. First, this will finally deliver on the promise of parity of esteem between academic and technical education, because all students will sit the advanced British standard. Second, we will raise the floor, ensuring that our children leave school literate and numerate, because with the advanced British standard, all students will study some form of maths and English to 18 with extra help for those who struggle most. In our country, no child should be left behind. Third, our 16 to 19-year-olds spend around a third less time in the classroom than some of our competitors. We must change this. So with our advanced British standard, students will spend at least 195 hours more with a teacher. And fourth, A-level students generally only do 3 subjects compared to the 7 studied by our economic competitors. The advanced British standard will change that too, with students now typically studying 5 subjects. And thanks to the extra teaching time that we are introducing, the greater breadth won't come at the expense of depth, which is such a strength of our system. Now, our new plan will require more teachers in the coming years. So I can announce today that in order to attract and retain more teachers, those who teach key subjects in schools, and for the first time in our further education colleges too, will receive special bonuses of up to £30,000 tax-free over the first 5 years of their career. Our teachers Our teachers do one of the most valuable jobs in our society, and we should reward them for that. And conference, I can tell you, my main funding priority in every spending review from now on will be education. Why? because it's the closest thing we have to a silver bullet. It is the best economic policy, the best social policy, the best moral policy. It is the best way to spread opportunity and to create a more prosperous society. It is not just my way, conference, it is the Conservative way. I know times have been tough. We have all had to deal with unprecedented challenges. And I will be straight with you. We have mountains to overcome still. But today we have made 3 huge decisions to change the direction of our country. We will give Britain the infrastructure it needs, protect the long-term future of our NHS and cut cancer deaths by a quarter, and create the best education system in the Western world to set up our children for the opportunities of the future. If we commit, if we come together, we can achieve truly great things. We can build a country where work is truly valued, where welfare is a safety net and not a way of life, where small businesses drive our economy, where innovation makes life better, where our NHS is properly funded and properly reformed, where our children are the best educated in the Western world, whether that's at university or, yes, through an apprenticeship, where the scourge of antisocial behaviour is treated as the crime it is and not some social condition, where for the most violent offenders life means life, where the people and their government decides who comes here and who can't, where the next generation can achieve the dream of owning their own home, where the elderly grow old with dignity and where the young grow up with opportunity, where decency and mutual respect bind communities together, where the very idea of Britain is a symbol of hope and stability across the world, and where our United Kingdom remains united. All this and more is ours if we want it, but we have to fight for it. At the next election, the choice the people face is bigger than party politics. Do we want a government committed to making long-term decisions, prepared to be radical in the face of challenges and to take on vested interests, or do we want to stand still and quietly accept more of the same? You either think this country needs to change or you don't. And if you do, you should stand with me and every person in this hall. You should stand with the Conservatives. Today, this party put the needs of the British people first. We've taken the decision many should have done, but didn't. We've ended the HS2 drama and in its place will embark on a full-scale national reinvestment in the infrastructure people actually use and want and the skilled workforce who will build it. And no more hiding. No more pretending in the face of overwhelming evidence. Too many sons and daughters, fathers and mothers are lost to lung cancer, heart disease, dementia, stillbirth, and we can change that. Today, we went beyond ideology and put the people first again and committed ourselves to ensure our children and grandchildren can be the first generation that doesn't have to suffer the false choice to quit smoking or not because they will never have started. Today, we set a course for our education system that will set our children up for the opportunities of the future. No more rip-off degrees, no more low aspiration, no more denigration of technical education, just the best education system in the Western world. We will be bold, we will be radical, we will face resistance, and we will meet it. We will give the country what it so sorely needs and yet too often has been denied. A government prepared to make long-term decisions so that we can build a brighter future for everyone. Be in no doubt, it is time for a change, and we are it. Thank you.
So the keynote speech from the Prime Minister to end the conference there. Just to remind you, the big headline, the axing of the HS2 line, the northern link from Birmingham to Manchester, back to Manchester there to get reaction in a moment. Let's bring you some other breaking news that we're getting through from Cheshire Constabulary.
Cheshire Constabulary has announced that the force is conducting a corporate manslaughter investigation at the Countess of Chester Hospital. That is following Lucy Letby's murder convictions, the former nurse. We will bring you more on this, but you will remember that she was sentenced to a whole life order after she was convicted of the murders of 7 babies and the attempted murder of 6 others at the Countess of Chester Hospital's neonatal unit in 2015 and 2016.
Let's bring you what Detective Superintendent Simon Blackwell has been saying in terms of the investigation, which will focus, he said, on the charges concerning Letby from June 2015 to 2016, considering areas including senior leadership at the hospital, trust decision-making to determine whether any criminality has taken place. But at this stage, he added, we are not investigating any individuals in relation to gross negligence manslaughter. More reaction, of course, to that as we get it. But let's return to Manchester after that speech from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, with the headline being that we have had the decision on HS2, no high-speed line now from Birmingham to Manchester. Instead, he outlined what he called Network North. The 36 billion, he said, that would be freed up would actually be rerouted, if that's the right phrase, into other projects, and that includes the 12 billion actually for Leeds to Manchester. He indicated that there would also be an upgrading of other rail lines and roads, and he had a plea to Andy Street, of course, the West Midlands Tory mayor. We can work together on this from Birmingham to Manchester.
The Prime Minister was greeted with plenty of applause in the room when he made this announcement, but what the thoughts are outside the room, we will be bringing you very shortly here on the live desk on GB News. But what he said was that the facts have changed, and the right thing to do is to have the courage to change direction. He said, I challenge anyone to tell me with a straight face that what he's announced is not what the North really needs. Our plan will ensure, says the Prime Minister, more growth here in the North than a faster train to London ever would. So get used to these titles now: Network North and Midlands Rail Hub. There will also be £12 billion protected to link up Manchester and Liverpool as planned. GB News' Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, was listening to all that. Tom, much of it was what was expected with the axing of the Manchester leg of HS2, but then lots of money poured into road and rail projects, which some people might not have been expecting.
Well, clearly there is a political challenge that the Prime Minister has now hoisted upon his opponents. £36 billion to be spent on incremental upgrades, smaller projects, of course, that Liverpool to Manchester line, the Leeds tram network, Leeds being the largest city in Europe without a dedicated public transport system. All of these projects, upgrades to the M6, the A5, the A75 and the Shipley bypass, all name-checked by the Prime Minister. And the question he asked of his political opponents was, do you want all of that, these hundreds of upgrades and projects across the Midlands and the North, or one rail line? It's a politically strong challenge to the Labour Party, and we'll see how they respond in due course. But it was fascinating across the course of this speech, the way in which the Prime Minister has presented himself as the candidate of change. Change from what he described as a 30-year status quo. Been doing things the same way for 30 years. Indeed, he described Sir Keir Starmer as the embodiment of that status quo, that 30-year consensus. Will people buy into this idea that the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, the guy who's been in charge in the driving seat for almost a year now, who was Chancellor for years before then, will they buy that this is the change candidate? Or will they think that that perhaps this is some political jiggery-pokery. That is a big, big question. But aside from the main theme of this being a change Prime Minister, a change candidate, changing the cosy status quo, we did hear some other little bits and bobs, particularly on this smoking age ban. Prohibition coming about from the Prime Minister, something that not many had expected before this speech, but incremental prohibition on smoking, so someone who is 14 years old today will never be able to buy a cigarette. Some other rabbits out of the hat in terms of policy terms, and indeed stronger language on transgender issues than I think we've ever heard the Prime Minister come out with before. Certainly this is a Prime Minister who is trying to redefine his role as someone who is perhaps more courageous in the way that he speaks and takes decisions.
Inevitably, the headlines will be on HS2, and you talked about political opponents. Of course, it's political colleagues that could well be the problem as well, in terms of Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor of West Midlands. And we had almost a plea to him to saying that, we can work together on this issue of Birmingham to Manchester. We have got to wait and see what Mr Street's response is. But the indications were from him before this announcement that he was going to basically call it out as an act of economic vandalism.
Notably, Andy Street was not in the hall today. He originally was going to be there listening to the Prime Minister. Of course, they are politicians of the same party, but he chose relatively last minute to not be here in the Manchester Convention Complex and instead to watch at home or in a private space with his own advisors. But it is interesting that he was name-checked so many times by the Prime Minister. The name Andy Street was mentioned not once, not twice, but at least 3 times in that speech. And I think it is very, very unlikely that such a heavy focus would be placed on Andy Street if there hadn't been some sort of understanding between the Prime Minister and the West Midlands Mayor beforehand. Potentially, all of these other projects and indeed money to upgrade infrastructure and transport infrastructure within the West Midlands, as the Prime Minister specifically name-checked as part of these other upgrades, perhaps he's reached some sort of accordance with the Mayor of the West Midlands.
Right, waiting for the signal to be green before proceeding, perhaps. For the moment there, thank you for that. Back to you in the conference, but let's bring in Danny Williams now, another name. He is the president of the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce, and you're now dealing with Network North, not with HS2. Does it chime with you?
I don't think it does. And it doesn't chime with a lot of the people of Greater Manchester and the North as a whole either. It's very much a promise that's been broken and something that we were eagerly anticipating to progress and go ahead in terms of levelling up.
And what in detail is the problem? Because clearly we've got the high-speed link now from Birmingham to Manchester off the planning, but we've got instead what the Prime Minister indicated would be other substantial investment. Manchester to Liverpool, 12 billion, although it won't be high-speed rail, a Midlands rail hub, the West Midlands Metro extended, the Leeds tram, electrifying the North Wales main line. So significant, 36 billion being spent, but not the high-speed sort of pinnacle, if you like.
Well, absolutely. And don't get me wrong, we obviously welcome further investment in the North as a whole, and this new Network North is going to be a key part